Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this year's edition of Tech Forum. My name is Peter Sandberg, and I'm the CEO of the Swedish Chamber of Commerce for the UK. And we are joining you today live from the SEB studio in central London. The Swedish Chamber of Commerce is a platform for Swedish-British business, and we focus on uniting around the greater trends and challenges facing us all. With over 400 member businesses we support, we discuss and we explore topics such as sustainability, people, culture, and the reason we're here today, tech and innovation. Today also marks the final day of our accelerator program, Access UK. The 4-day-long program focuses on supporting and enabling a group of 10 hand-selected Swedish scale-ups on their UK entry or expansion journeys. The program is a long-term partnership with the Swedish Agency for Economic Growth, Startup Sweden, and the UK's Department for International Trade. Another 10 Swedish scale-ups ready, preparing for UK market entry. The audience today is a mix of large corporates, academia, investors and policymakers, but also some 100 startups and scale-ups too. A warm welcome to all of you and thank you for being with us here today. This year's Tech Forum hones in on artificial intelligence. So the storm is coming, they say, but how can Europe get ahead in the race? The detailed program of today's agenda, including a presentation of all speakers, is available online on sec.org.uk and also through the QR code shared here. Now, today wouldn't be made possible without our sponsors and partners. Thanks to Pocket Law, the smart and digital legal solutions provider. Check them out. And a special thank you to our patrons, SEB, for hosting us here virtually from their St. Paul's office. Also, a big thanks to our partners located all over the UK and Sweden, sponsors of the SEC Tech Week activities, Danske Bank and Goodwill, and supporting chambers. But now, and for our first speaker, it is an honor to welcome back Rajesh Agrawal, who's the Deputy Mayor of London for Business, to share his views on London as a tech capital. Rajesh comes from an entrepreneurial background like many of you here in the audience today, and he has a special passion for creating opportunities for the next generation of businesses and proving that London is playing a big part in this. Mr. Deputy Mayor, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Peter. It is a pleasure to speak to you on this tech forum hosted by the Swedish Chamber of Commerce in the UK. Today is a fantastic opportunity for the UK and Swedish tech ecosystem to come together, a chance to facilitate key conversations and to support the growth and development of our thriving tech communities in both countries. The tech industry has proven that it has a vital role to play in helping to tackle challenges and create solutions across all industries and societies at large, with great advances, for example, being made in financial services, the automotive and mobility industries. There is also no doubt that tech will be at the forefront of the global push for a more sustainable economy and society. In these unprecedented times, it is important to acknowledge the terrible impact of the COVID-19 pandemic that it has had, both in terms of lives and livelihoods lost. If there is anything positive that we can take from the disruption caused this year by COVID-19, it is perhaps that it presents us with the unique conditions to respond, recover, and grow in an impactful and intentional way towards a fairer and more sustainable economy. Beyond its capabilities and potential impact were the reasons for the confidence in the tech industry has been its growth over the past years, and particularly because the sector has also proved incredibly resilient over the course of the pandemic, that it has led to two positives for tech businesses. The first is the role that many have played to support the fight against COVID-19 and the medical industries at large, helping local communities here in London, home to clusters of fast-growing, game-changing tech companies in areas such as artificial intelligence, medtech, edtech, and fintech. London's tech community was quite quick to rise to the challenge as businesses pivoted and adopted to help others and support the wider community. The second is that its resilience meant that there is currently record level of venture capital ready to be deployed in tech growth, which in turns means it will be crucial to London's and UK's longer term economic recovery. London's creative energy, born out of the city's rich heritage, culture, free thinking mindset, and diversity, has helped and will continue helping the city through the unprecedented challenge towards recovery. London is home to creativity, resilience, fast growing, and open minded communities. It is home to a large pool of talent, and we would love to welcome even more of that. London is open. We proudly welcome many Swedish tech businesses in the city, and the likes of Spotify, King, and Klarna today employ over 1,000 people in our city, and London is home to over 1,000 VCs and investment firms. Just last year, Bambusters announced that they have established a new entity in the UK, the Mayor of London, through the organization London and Partners, which I chair, actively helps businesses setting up in the city, and it can assist you with the support where needed. Please feel free to speak to the Swedish Chamber of Commerce if you need an introduction, or to myself or to a member of the London and Partners team. I also know that today is the culmination of a 1-week accelerator program for Swedish tech setting up in the UK, organized by the Swedish Chamber and the Swedish Agency for Economic Growth. I want to say a special welcome to you and your businesses, and I hope that I will see you thrive in London. Thanks again to the Swedish Chamber for hosting this important platform, and I wish you all a fantastic forum with lots of insights into the opportunities of artificial intelligence. Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and I think the message is clear. London is open and ready to welcome even more startups and businesses from Sweden, hopefully. I now have the great pleasure of welcoming Matthew Blakemore, who will be your host for today. Matthew works at the British Board of Film Classification and is a big AI advocate in general. In his daily work, he manages the delivery of solutions, including AI, to support the classification work of the BBFC. But today, Matthew is here to take us through the day and the agenda in the role as Master of Ceremonies. So before I leave you in safe hands with Matthew, I encourage you all to make the most of today. Use the Q&A function to pose questions to the speakers and get involved in the conversation. And if you have any technical issues at all, please contact the SEC team. Now, without further ado, Matthew, over to you.
Thank you very much. And it's great to be with you all today. What a fascinating start to the event, getting the thoughts of Rajesh on creating a tech capital. This year's Tech Forum will feature keynotes, panels, and a fireside chat, all focused on an AI-enabled future. We will be exploring the potential of AI as a driver for the next industrial revolution, how AI can be adopted by organizations to give them a competitive edge, the impact AI is set to have on how we travel around, AI that is capturing the interest of lead investors, and the ethical challenges associated with the wider adoption of AI. Today's event is interactive, so I encourage you to use the Q&A function for comments and questions throughout. Next, We are honoured to be joined by Sarah Mazur, Chair at Wallenberg Artificial Intelligence Autonomous Systems Software Programme. Sarah has an abundance of experience when it comes to advanced technology, having spent 23 years strengthening Ericsson's technical excellence. She now imparts her knowledge as a board member for several companies, including Saab, Investor, Combient and Nobel Media. Today, Sarah will be sharing with us how AI can be the spark of a new industrial revolution. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for the nice introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here to talk about AI and AI as a part of the next industrial revolution. And we are really living in super interesting times nowadays, and it's because we are in the middle of the next industrial revolution. But to me, it is not at all a storm that we're facing. It's a wave, and with a wave, that also gives you some really nice opportunities for a super good surf. So we all have the choice. Do we want to surf on the wave or be left behind when the wave has passed? And in order to surf, there are a few things that we need to do. We need to buy a nice surfing board. We need to prepare ourselves with some knowledge on how to surf and then paddle. And that's exactly where we are. And I hope that you will all decide that you want to surf on the wave and have a really good surf on the next industrial revolution wave. So what is happening now? It's that for both industry and society, we are at the turning point. And the reason that we are at that turning point now is because we have quite a few of groundbreaking technologies that are now evolved at the level where they can and are used in the transformation, both of industry, but also of our lives, of society, of how we meet people, how we socialize, how we produce things. And the main components of that technology revolution are the 5G communication networks that enables us to not only communicate between people and with internet, but also where we have very efficient communication between things, both small sensors, but also critical things. And that is all enabled by the 5G communication technology. We have the advances in automation, that allows us to automate production, automate other things that gives us a tremendous increase in productivity and efficiency. We have the IoT technologies where we can connect things, we can monitor a large number of sensors, we can also control things remotely. That open up completely new opportunities between how we physically locate where the work is performed and where the work is controlled. And then we also have the advances in software technology, where we now all use cloud technologies, distributed cloud technologies, and we have virtualization that enables us to decouple software from the hardware platform that it is built for, and then makes it possible to run all applications in a cloud environment. And on top of that, perhaps the most interesting and the most transformative technology is the AI and machine learning technologies. And that is actually where the great value is built. So the other technologies are more enabling the transformation, but the value is created by the AI and machine learning technologies. So industrial revolutions is not something new. We have been through a number of them, and this is a slide that I have borrowed from Professor Carlota Perez. It shows how each industrial revolution is built, with the first installation period where we build technologies, we refine technologies and make them ready for being used in the transformation. And then there's a turning point in the middle where the technologies are at the level where they can be used, but the full usage has not yet taken off. And then that's exactly where we are now when it comes to AI and machine learning. So we see lots of use cases coming up, but we have still not at all seen the full potential of these technologies. And then the last phase is the deployment period, where the technologies are used in the transformation to give us completely advances in productivity and well-being. So for each this industrial revolution, has brought a paradigm shift, and that has given us a leap in both productivity and well-being. So that is also true for this industrial revolution. And it also creates new and cheaper ways of accessing things, but it also opens up possibilities to do things that we never even thought of before. What is interesting with this model is that the companies, the organizations, the societies that were the ones that were the leaders in the first phase, the installation period, are not necessarily the same ones that are leaders in the second phase, in the deployment phase. So for all of us, it is important that we decide, I talked about the wave earlier, that we take an active decision. We want to be leaders also in the deployment phase, which means that we need to really jump on this train with the AI and enable, embrace the technology evolution we see and use that to the full extent that we can. Saying that, it's not only about technology. Technology enables us to do things in a new and cheaper way, but it's also about how we do it in a way that we do it in a trustworthy way, that we do it in an ethical way. But with this technological revolution that we see now, what are the key components that has given us really advances? Well, we see for communication and computation, that has been enabled by the evolution in hardware and software and virtualization. So now basically all computation is done in data centers on a virtualized platform, and communication enables us to connect to the data centers and gives us access to applications basically wherever we are. When it comes to transaction, we now have blockchain technologies that has given us new way on how we handle our payments in a secure way. And that is something that has made our lives much easier. And then AI will give us even more possibilities for prediction, for optimization, but also for making use of experience from a huge database that is by far over the size that we as humans can use. That is what the AI technology will enable for us. But as I said, it's not only about technology. This has to be done in a responsible way. These technologies are really key technologies also in for us to build a sustainable development, sustainable evolution of society and of industries. So it has to be done responsibly, trustworthy, ethical, building as a circular economy, a circular society, but also for a sustainable evolution. And this means that it's a lot of this research and evolution work has to be done across disciplines. And we will also see a lot of innovation coming up across these disciplines. So it's super important as we work on this that we have an ecosystem that is comprised of many players that work together in a good way on non-competing terms. This is exactly the background that we from Knut and Elise Wallenberg Foundation has decided to fund the WASP program. And WASP stands for Wallenberg AI Autonomous Systems and Software Program. It was started in 2015, and it was started with the prime objective to support Swedish industry with the need, their competence need in the areas of AI, autonomous systems, and software. It's the largest individual research program ever in Sweden, with a budget of 5.5 billion Swedish crowns, and it runs for 15 years until 2030. Out of that, the majority of the funding, 4.2 billion, comes from Knut and Elise Wallenberg Foundation, and then the program is also co-funded by Swedish industry and by Swedish universities. The vision with the program is to conduct excellent research and build competence in AI, autonomous systems, and software for the benefit of Swedish industry. And here the term Swedish industry is used in a very broad way, so it actually comprises basically all companies in Sweden. So it includes banking, finance sector, insurance, everything. What we do is that we fund basic excellent research, but we do that in a leading platform together with Swedish industry to develop competence and knowledge for the future. when we look at, we did a very extensive strategy work in WASP last year, and when we look at our wanted position 2030, 10 years from now, so what do we want to have achieved by then? Of course, it's a lot about having Sweden in the lead of the research in AI, autonomous systems and software, attracting talent to Sweden, having the best PhD program, but it's also very clearly states Swedish industry thrives through competence and innovation from WASP, and that we should have created successful spin-off companies through the program. And that we want Sweden to be a premium international partner and role model, and Sweden being able to influence the international agenda. So it's about boosting Sweden for the benefit of Sweden and for Swedish industry, and building both for our existing industry, but also building new companies in Sweden. What are we doing in concrete terms? Well, we are running a research program with the best researchers that we have in the field. We are recruiting both leading and young researchers. The target is 80 to 100 recruitments, building new research teams in Sweden, and we are now at 44. We are running a huge graduate school where the target is to have 600 PhDs when we end, with at least 150 industrial PhDs, and we are today at 370 PhD students and 114 industrial PhD students. We are running research arenas in cooperation with Swedish industry in the areas of data center and cloud computing, software technologies, media and language processing, robotics, and public safety. And we also have a sister program, WASP HS, for humanities and society research. Another sister program on data-driven life science, where the ambition is to build together the competence that we're building in WASP with AI, together with the strength that we have in Sweden in life science research. We have an innovation platform that is called VALP, the Wallenberg Launchpad, where we support our researchers with funding for the initial stages of innovation, building a proof of concept and research validation. And we have also invested in a new supercomputer in Sweden. So we have invested 300 million Swedish crowns at Linköping University, building a new supercomputer. Here is a list of some of our industrial partners, and as you can see, we have both small and big companies joining us. A few words about the sister program, WASP HS. As I said, it's not all about technology. If we want to ensure that the technologies that we are building through our research will be used and that we will be able to use them to the full extent, we need to ensure that we understand the ethical aspects, that we understand the economical consequences, that we can update our legal framework and regulations, and that we also understand the consequences on our social systems, including the impact on the labor market, and how we can improve our information systems. And this is exactly what this program, WASP HS, the sister program, is about, funding research in these areas. We are, of course, working together with the Swedish national initiative, AI Sweden. Their objective is to accelerate the use of AI for the benefit of our society, our competitiveness, and for everyone living in Sweden. And their focus in AI Sweden is more on applying research, whereas the focus in the WASP program is on basic research. So it's a very good fit between the two initiatives. AI Sweden has lots of partners, both big companies, small companies, but also from public sector and universities. And we have also recently in Sweden done a map of the Swedish AI startup landscape together with RISE Ignite Sweden and AI Sweden. And it was really positive. What we see is that we have a very active AI startup landscape in Sweden. So lots of new Swedish companies are coming up in the middle of this industrial revolution, and because of the new technologies that are enabling the revolution. And as I understand it, many of you are also present in this conference. So putting all of that together, we have some really good strengths to build on from Sweden. We have research, we have innovation, and that will enable us to also have impact. So we have the research programs, WASP and WASP Ages, focusing on AI autonomous systems and software, and WASP Ages also then on the human and society parts. We have VARA, which is our research arenas together with Swedish industry, where we research areas together with industry, and industry contributes with competence and the latest platforms and opens up for the academic researchers. We have the Wallenberg Launchpad, VALP, for the initial stages of innovation. We have AI Sweden, the national initiative that is a very good complement focusing on applied research. We have Ignite Sweden working with the startups. We have a very active AI startup landscape in Sweden, and we have the large companies that are engaging more and more in this race. So putting all of that together and building on our strength that we have in Sweden and in Europe with working together across industry, academia, and research funders, I would say that we are building a good position for the future. Thank you, and over to you, Matthew.
Thank you so much for a fantastic presentation. We've certainly had a lot of engagement with our audience, and we've selected some questions to put to you today, if you'd be kind enough to give us more of your expertise. So the first question that has been selected is, where do you believe the opportunities lie for academia and corporations to cooperate and deploy AI?
I think there are many very good cases, and the first ones that we have seen are exactly the ones that we have built our research arenas on, because they were initiated by the industries and by academia together. So they were not decided by us in the program, they were nominated, and they are also driven from industry and academia together. So there we have, as I said, we have public safety, we have data center and cloud computing, we have robotics, we have software, and we have media and language. So those are at least 5 really good areas where we see a great cooperation between academia and Swedish industry.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And the next question is, what do you believe are the largest obstacles for AI to enable a new industrial revolution?
What I think is the largest obstacle, or what I'm afraid of, is that it's not about technology, because I think we will come up with great technologies since we and others are putting a lot of effort into this. What I'm afraid of is that we will see the largest obstacles in law, regulations, and that people are afraid of the new technologies because we don't fully understand that, or we cannot really show how we can use it in an ethically correct way. So that is why the WASP Ages program is so important, because otherwise, if we don't solve the ethical aspects, the trustworthiness, the laws and regulations, and understand the impact on economy and society, we will not be able to use the technology to a full extent.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And of course, we will be touching on the trustworthiness and ethical aspects of AI as well later in the Tech Forum. But thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today, Sarah. We really appreciate it. I'm sure the audience agree that all of that was extremely interesting. We will now storm ahead to our fireside chat. The storm is coming, and the storm is artificial intelligence. But how can Europe get ahead? We are lucky to be joined by artificial intelligence and international affairs expert Aurore Belfrage, a tech entrepreneur, political advisor, and investor who will be leading the discussion for us today. Take it away, Aurore.
Well, welcome everyone. The title of today's fireside chat is "The Storm is Coming," which Sarah Munzer immediately challenged the premise of the question. We would like to state here that the storm is artificial intelligence, but how can Europe get ahead? Sarah was saying, maybe it's a surf. Maybe we should get a surfboard, learn how to surf, and have fun riding the wave. And I'd like to probably frame it, digitalization, including AI, and the parallel transformation of a fossil-free economy will provide epic business opportunities for the agile and brave. AI is rapidly developing all over the world with innovation and implementations every day. And the big question is, where is Europe? Whilst the continent is balancing the interests of public and private and busily thinking about regulation, Asia and America are running. And how do we become an attractive destination for visionaries, implementers, researchers, and capital? I have the honor of moderating today's session and an esteemed panel, Irla Kilbane-Dahl, the Deputy Head of the UK Government's Office for Artificial Intelligence, Richard Steiber, the CEO of Good Trust and a prominent Swedish thinker and techie, myself, Aurora Belfrage, technology investor, geopolitical advisor, and I run a think tank in the intersection technology and sustainability called Sustainable. And I'm also an advisor for the Swedish national coordination entity, AI Sweden. So before we dive into storm versus surf, Europe versus the rest, let's have an introduction of our panel. Richard, could you start and give us a brief intro to where you are and your take on this question?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Richard Steiber. I'm a tech executive. I currently live here in Silicon Valley. I came over here with Google many years. So I spent many years with Google. And I have a special interest in artificial intelligence. I'm a limited partner investor in AI startups with Bootstrap Labs. And my day job is that I run a company called Good Trust. So Good Trust tried to solve the problem that no one knows anything about what's happening to their digital stuff when they die. All those accounts, documents, everything that you have. But also, we want to use AI to make sure that you can live forever. So essentially, your avatar can live forever and basically have access to all the things that you've done on social media, all your documents and everything. And think sort of Siri, think Alexa, that you can kind of talk to Granddad even after he has passed away. So that's one of the projects we're doing. So my perspective on this is that a lot of things are at stake here, and the storm is coming. It's not a nice little surf at all, because AI is going to change everything in terms of how we live, how we work, how we learn, and it's going to have radical changes on the world and the society today, which means that whoever controls the AI will control the world. So failure here is not really an option. So that's my little intro.
Good. I'm glad we're all clear. There's no nuance here, Richard. Irla, what's your take on this?
Well, so my background is in, originally I was an atmospheric scientist, and I spent quite a lot of my career working in sustainability. So I came to AI through a public policy approach. For a while, I led the AI lab at the European Space Agency in their Earth observation program in Frascati, before becoming deputy head of the Office for AI here in the UK. My take on it is that Richard makes some very good points. This is AI is an absolutely transformative technology, and as Eric Schmidt and the NSC AI in the US have pointed out, it is a technology that enables strategic advantages for not only nations, but also for corporations. And it's essential that we here in Europe, all of us, remain major players in AI. But I don't think we need to be too pessimistic just yet. We haven't lost the race. We have some extraordinary foundations in the UK and in other European nations to build on. As we were discussing just before we came on air, Aurora, many of the world experts in AI come from a European background. And so the race is far from lost. But of course, we do need to speed up. We have more to do. It's interesting when you look at the figures, for example, on investment into AI. I mean, some of the figures now put Europe ahead of China. So unlike some of the scuttlebutt, shall we say, It's not all lost yet, and I think there's plenty for us to build on.
Erla, could you please enlighten us? Well, which stats put us ahead of China?
I think I have a report that I can share. It's a report on European startups that actually I think funded by the European Commission. That puts investment into European startups ahead of that in China, obviously second behind the US. But figures like that, I mean, obviously they're not trivial to come by, and they're like many of these sort of statistics, they involve a bit of guesswork. But I think it shows that there is a lot of growth in the UK and in Europe. I mean, in the UK, we're pretty confident on our own of being third in the world on investment into startups in AI. So when you take the UK and other European nations together, it doesn't surprise me that figures like that are out there. I'm happy to share that report afterwards if you like.
Please.
I think actually Erla is right, because if you look at startups, which is one indicator of innovation, you know in the US, I think the latest figure is that we had like some 1,400 AI startups. Europe would have probably 800 or so, and China would have 400 or so. But I think it's also a notion, like, the startup culture in Silicon Valley, for example, and the access to venture capital and the culture of being an entrepreneur, and anyone can make it here, would infuse that strategy. And I think it's happening now in Europe, it's happening in London, happening in Stockholm, in Sweden, and throughout Europe. So we're kind of catching up a little bit. But of course, access to capital may not still be what it is here in the US, because we're like way ahead. But of course, in China, so I worked with HTC and spent some time in China, there's a different kind of startup. It's happening now again, but if you go back 10 years ago, maybe as some students doing a startup was not necessarily the way you did it. So of course there's fewer, but of course if you would look at number of patents or money spent in China, it will dwarf Europe by far, for sure.
And obviously, the startups need to sit in a context in order for it to scale and grow. So the KPI on itself is a positive indicator. And I think if we're doing this as a race and as a storm, and we use that analogy, of course, our counterparts will play us down. And you mentioned Eric Schmidt, who last week sat on a panel at Politico Europe together with the Minister for Digital and Telecommunications in France. And he was very blunt, and he said, I would like to be very blunt. If Europe leads with legislation first, we won't stand a chance. And I think it's also, if we use that terminology, we will cement that. And maybe there's a power in the underdog. But I'd like to go into Erla, you look like you want to comment on that.
I do, because I think it's important not to get too bought into this idea that we're losing and the US is out in front and all the rest. I mean, we got to be clear that part of what Schmidt is talking about, and part of his analysis in the NSC AI, is that actually the US needs to get its act together, and that its public investment in AI has been insufficient. And what we're seeing in the US is actually action now to try and play catch up from public investment, because the vast majority of the investment up to now has been in the private sector.
But
European countries.
Congress just approved a huge investment over the next 10 years into artificial intelligence. So
yes, absolutely. But it takes time for those things to have an impact. And the UK is in the lucky position that we set up our £1 billion AI sector deal now 4 years ago. That has had time to bed in and have its effects. So whereas American public investment is only just starting to get going, it takes years to produce results in these kind of programs. You've got to recognize too that different countries and different continents take different approaches. The US is very private sector led. China is very driven by state-owned enterprises, and of course the BAT. And in European countries we take, and in the UK we take a somewhat different mixed approach between the public and private, with the UK being probably more private sector focused and encouraging more competition, whereas our partners across the channel taking a slightly more public focused approach. These things work in different ways. So I don't think we're quite in the world of a council of despair just yet.
Could we dive into the details of that? Because you have announced that the UK has a national AI strategy that will be presented in its fullity after summer. But could you give us a sneak peek of the building blocks of your AI strategy?
I mean, I don't want to say too much because that's still in development. But the core things that we're going to do, for example, are to build on the foundations. So the UK has fantastic AI foundations. We're in the very lucky position that I think, as I said already, we get the third highest levels of investment in AI startups in the world. We are one of, I can't remember whether it's second or third most attractive location for AI high talent to come and live and work. We have some of the leading AI universities in the world. We produce per capita huge amounts of IP and new science and technology, and we have some fantastic unicorns. You know, not to mention companies like DeepMind and Benevolent AI and Darktrace and others. You know, so the first step for us is building on those foundations, giving the opportunity for that deep academic, scientific, and private sector expertise to grow further. Secondly, it's clear. We can all see the sort of discussions that are taking place globally right now, whether at UNESCO, whether at the Council of Europe, whether through the EU AI Act, that there's growing attention on how we need to think about the governance of AI and get that right, so we protect human rights, we protect democratic principles. We do that as commonly as possible with our allies and those with like-minded nations, but also we don't stifle innovation. And that's the real challenge, getting the balance right between ethics and governance that protects human rights, but doesn't stifle innovation. And that's one of the other key topics we plan to address.
Richard, I had asked you to put your Swedish hat on, and I know that you've migrated to the US and you've made probably some choices there that would be interesting to hear. But listening to the UK strategy and balancing regulation, opportunity, talent, capital, and I think a very important point, we need time. You can't just press a button; it's not binary. What's your take on Sweden? How do we need to play this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of key sort of pillars that you need to put in place. So one pillar is, of course, you need a national strategy. Sweden has a national strategy, which means that the government has realized that it is important in starting these initiatives. I think the other one is that industry needs to adopt artificial intelligence and machine learning. And if you think about the sea changes we had recently, we went online. Companies who went online became successful. The companies who didn't, potentially went out of business. We had the mobile sea change. Everything went mobile. Some companies were kind of left behind. And I do think that artificial intelligence is one of these sea changes, which means that it's not just government, also industry. So UK and Swedish companies, it doesn't matter if we have all these numbers, but if our CEOs of all these companies are clueless about AI and how they can use it, it's not going to help us much, because it's just going to be wasted money. And then I think the educational system, investing in research and in universities to breed the next top talent, so important. And then I think once they graduate, these folks, you should give them money and venture capital to start these businesses. And so you need to kind of have that innovation ecosystem. I think the interesting study I saw was that top AI talent is like, where do they come from and where do they end up? So as it turns out that, some 20% of the top talent actually are from Europe today. However, only the top talent who are, if you look at where they're working, only like 10% are in Europe. So for you as it's very different, because then you have 20% coming from the US, but actually 60% of the top talent is working in the US, because probably here's where you have the top leading edge stuff. We pay you more money, you know, more opportunities and things like that. So for Sweden, which is such a small, lovely country, and it's bright and sunny all the day. So, you know, if we breed those top talent, same for the UK, actually, if you breed that top talent and we invested all this money in them, you know, you don't want them to come to sunny California and work in Silicon Valley like I do. I mean, who would want to work here? So I think that's the trick also. We also need to retain those top talent. We need, because we spend so much investment in it. So it's not just planting the flowers, we actually need the flowers to stay in our country.
Urla, how do we do this? And Richard was implying that the corporate management teams and the corporate echelon are clueless, and in order to retain talent, that can't be true. What do we do about this?
I think it's absolutely critical, but I mean, here in the UK, we've taken the approach of our Turing fellowships at the Alan Turing Institute to attract top talent from around the world. Of course, there are similar approaches in some other European nations, but it's not just about money. I mean, obviously money is very, very important, and it allows people to establish research groups and to fund postdocs and so forth. But it's also about providing the right topics to work on. I mean, you mentioned, Aurora, sustainability, net zero, climate. I mean, we know the huge interest in the AI community, and not just doing AI for its own sake, not just doing AI to sell better advertising or make Siri work better or Alexa, but in solving really important global problems like climate change, like I mean, the response of the AI community to the COVID pandemic was remarkable. You know, the progress, for example, with using AlphaFold to test for possible pharmaceuticals that might be applicable to the problem, and you know, even if you just ignore the outputs of that, what was really interesting about it was the enormous effort put in by multiple AI communities around the world into trying to tackle the pandemic, whether it was groups at Ellis, whether it was groups at Clare, whether it was groups at the Global Partnership on AI. Big efforts were made to try and bring AI to that problem. And I think that's part of the answer to your question, that it's about focusing AI not just on corporate problems. It's about focusing AI on problems that researchers have interest in, and understanding that many of these researchers are driven by ethics and driven by interests that go beyond just computer science.
And then there's the other element that ties into where we started. We started talking about the US being enterprise-led and China being state-led, and the applying artificial intelligence to the big challenges of our time, i.e. sustainability and climate change, will need a marriage of public-private. And there's a cultural difference, and we only have a minute and a half left, so we won't be able to deep dive into it. But I think there's something important to be done in the cultural differences, the languages of how tech and public sector work. Richard, you're nodding?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, AI and climate change actually has, or the climate crisis actually has some things in common. In Sweden and the UK, we can't regulate climate so that we have better climate in Sweden and the UK. It's much more of a global problem. And the same thing with AI. It doesn't matter if Europe or UK or Sweden have some regulations to create more ethical AI. It doesn't matter, because there will be other countries who don't gonna give a shit about that. And I actually think that maybe AI is not necessarily something which is a national thing. It's a corporate thing. So if you think about companies, my previous employer, Google, who have access to all the world's information, they have, you know, more hosting and service, they have their own sort of computer farms, you know, they have unlimited almost amount of money. So there will be some of these giants that, you know, would outspend, you know, many European countries, or potentially the entirety of Europe.
And our time is unfortunately up here, Richard. Yeah. We've just scraped the surface on how to use artificial intelligence to solve the big problems of our time. And debating whether it's a storm or a surf and the geopolitical consequences of it. And we look forward to reading the report, Erla, when it comes out after the summer, on how the UK is tackling and being positive, progressive, and supportive, and hopefully that will spill out in all of Europe. I still count you as Europe, and you have no more seconds to defute that. So thank you very much.
We're definitely still on the continent of Europe, without a shadow of a doubt.
Thank you. Handing over to the.
Thank you.
Matthew.
Thank you, Aurora, Ayala, and Ricard, for a truly fascinating panel. We are now going to take a short coffee break, but stay tuned as our next panel will discuss adopting AI across an organisation. Remember to use the QR code on the screen to access the digital programme to find out more about today's agenda and speakers. Welcome back. I hope you're all refreshed after our fika and ready for a more absorbing panels. Next up is a topic close to my heart, adopting AI across an organisation. I'm really looking forward to hearing how organisations across multiple sectors have used AI to give themselves a competitive advantage. It will be a fantastic opportunity to think about how one might incorporate AI into one's own organisation. Leading the panel will be Harry Rees-Davis, a Tech Forum veteran and all-round tech guru. Until recently, Harry ran Tech Nation's Applied AI program, and today he is Chief of Staff at Grey Parrot, an innovative business that automates waste composition analysis using AI-powered computer vision software. Over to you, Harry.
Good afternoon, everybody, from a very sunny London. My name is Harry, and it's a pleasure to be introducing our next panel, which focuses upon adopting AI in the organization with a stellar lineup of guests. We'll be looking at how AI is driving innovation and impact across a number of industries, how it's evolving, as well as diving into best practice and how to practically implement it. We will try and take questions at the end, so do please keep them coming on the Slido, and we'll try our best to answer them towards the end of the session. And I'm going to kick off by asking our panelists to introduce themselves one by one. And I'm going to start with Simone Larson, who's Head of AI Machine Learning at Commercial Product Lead at Digital Catapult. Simone, over to you.
Thank you, Harry. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Simone Larson, and I lead on AI commercial product at Digital Catapult. So what that means is I sit at the nexus of industry needs, as well as the startups and scale-up community and their own internal tech team to figure out what the demand is and how we can address market failure.
Thanks, Simone. And I'm going to go to Errol next, who's Head of AI Foundation at H&M Group.
Thank you so much, Harry. It's a pleasure being here. My name is, as you mentioned, Errol Kohlmeister. I've been at H&M for the last 3 years now, building up the AI capability at H&M Group, where we today are over 100 people working on pushing AI models into production and actually getting the real benefits out of it. I have for several years before that worked with large industry on advising them on how to actually use AI in production.
And let's go to Kai at AI Sweden.
Yeah, very excited to be here. Thank you, Harry. I work at AI Sweden, which is the Swedish National AI Center. My responsibility is major impact initiatives, broad initiatives that span across sectors and industries, because a lot of the challenges and opportunities are industry agnostic. And our partners include hundreds of organizations, both from the private and public sector across all of Sweden.
Thanks, Kai. Let's go to Dimitri, finally.
Yes, thank you, Harry. My name is Dimitri French, and I am AI and Machine Learning Lead at Amazon Web Services. My role is spending time with customers to take ideas and put them into production with machine learning. So very much on the productionization side of AI and machine learning.
Thanks, Dimitri. Right, Kai, let's get straight into the point then. So this panel obviously about implementing AI in industry, in the workplace. And let's really start with just delving into why bother in the first place? If you're a business manager, why should you be thinking about implementing AI, and will you really lose out if you don't?
Well, yeah, definitely. I think it's a good question and worth repeating. AI to me is all about finding patterns in large numbers of data, which is the critical driving force in any organization, being able to understand what your customer needs or your business needs. And AI enables us to see patterns that we as humans, due to our cognitive limitations, cannot see or are restricted because of time and resources. A teacher can't know what every child in a class needs at any point in time, but AI can enable them to understand better what every child needs. The same way a CEO can't know at any point in time what supply chain works best or when they need to change price points, but AI models can help them understand that, if they can learn to trust those models and really become data driven. So that's I think my summary of why AI is going to be the driving force for the foreseeable future.
And Simone, coming to you, I'd love to get your sense of the opportunity. What potential do you see for AI in the workplace? And are there any case studies that you've come across in your work that really point to the impact that AI has had in the workplace?
Yeah, so in terms of potential impact, I think it's important to look at it from two perspectives, right? Internally, as well as the products and services that a company pushes out, either from a B2B perspective or a B2C perspective. If you look at AI internally, optimization and efficiency around how operations are run or how productive employees are. On the initial point, so AI is fundamentally good at three things right now. So that's pattern recognition, optimization, and imitation. So if you look internally as an organization, when you hear about companies like Microsoft with their productivity software that's deployed in terms of Teams and integration with Outlook, that really helps employees get the right information where they want it, when they want it, in terms of to allow for increased interaction and knowledge sharing. If you look externally as to when companies either integrate AI into their products and services, or they look at how they can harness the data that they get from their consumers, there's great impact, right? All we have to do is look at the AI first companies that have been making hand over fist on exploiting the data from the customers that they have interacted with. From an industry perspective, we can think about servitization, right? So if we think about the aerospace and defense industry, Rolls-Royce, they were really the pioneers in terms of engines as a service, where actually you're paying for hours in flight and they're taking care of, by predictive maintenance and condition monitoring, they're taking care of the maintenance of that asset. So it's twofold. It's not just externally to products and services, but it's also internally in terms of optimizing how an organization is run.
Brilliant. And Errol, coming to you, naturally when we think of AI, we by extension think of automation, and very much within that we think of automating jobs, which can scare a lot of people, and it touched upon that quite frequently. I'd love to get your sense as to what that means for you, and do you see AI as an automating technology that will automate jobs, or do you see it potentially being more complementary?
Yeah, I mean, I want to connect back to some of the earlier presentations today where we talked about the industrial revolution and AI also being a part of this revolution. And I also want to clarify that AI today is not relatively smart. We talk about very narrow AI today. And I just want to emphasize on that. We're not talking about general AI, artificial intelligence. So at H&M, we have really analyzed this problem. And when we talk about AI today, we more want to emphasize amplified intelligence. And it's a concept we really have close to our heart, because for us, it's not about automating jobs. Some of these things are very monotone and very kind of good at pattern recognition. But what we really want to do is make sure that the people working on H&M, they get to work on the topics that are good for humans, the creative part, the things which an AI today can't do because it's not general enough, so that we lift them away from doing monotone tasks and actually being able to be the best humans that they can be. So AI will support us with many things and will release a lot of time for people to focus on more important things in the future.
It's a great point. I really like that piece on AI being narrow. I think Benedict Evans has a great blog on machine learning and talks about there being essentially, I think, 1 million interns at your disposal, or using that as a metaphor, where essentially you can do very narrow tasks at scale. So I think a great way of looking at it. Kai, I suppose once you've been through that business case and you've decided, yes, this is something that we ought to do as an organization, how should a business prepare to use AI? And how do you bring the rest of the business on board? How do you get buy-in across the organization to do it?
I would say probably by far and above all, the most important thing is that ownership of the AI value potential lies with the CEO and the management group. And they do not disregard this as a technical challenge and delegate it to IT or an R&D department, because we've seen that happen 25 years ago when internet came along, and we know what happened with those companies. And also embrace honesty. Where are we right now? Are we AI driven? Do we have an AI strategy? what are our capabilities, and then put value, understand and do an inventory of AI opportunities and put a value to that and incorporate that into the business strategy. It's not an AI strategy, it's a natural part of your business strategy going forward.
That's kind. And Dimitri, touching upon that, how do you see the early implementation process in an organization, and how do you progress AI in an organization? I think you touched before on this idea of productizing AI.
Yeah, so first of all, I very much agree with Kai's point, because the implementation starts way before technology. It starts with organizational assessment and understanding how it aligns to your strategy. And these things are important. I'll give you an example. There's no machine learning without data. And if this is strategic and standard to organization, if there is buy-in, then when you want to go and get this data, things work, you have less obstacles. But I see many of our customers using certain checklists, like a pilot's checklist, way before they get to technology, way before they get to experimentation. And they try to answer questions like, okay, assume you know the answer, assume you know the answer from patterns and data. Can you go and change your process? Can you? Are there any regulation implications? Assuming you can change it, how are you going to do it? So going through this reality check, I think way before technology comes into play is really, really important. And then there is technology stage and experimentation. And it's important to have the right expectations here. Now, machine learning is iterative by nature. So what you will find, you will implement version 1 and version 2, version 3. So very quickly, try quickly, fail quickly, have early success, understand the direction of travel, and then set up this process and cycle of innovation in very small steps. And every successful project I have seen, they followed pretty much the same pattern.
Thanks, Dimitri. And Simone, I'm going to tie my next question in with Frida's here, I see, which she's posted a question on how do we make sure that the results of AI are inclusive. And I know the Catapult and your work focuses very much on the ethical considerations of AI when you're looking to implement. And I'd love to understand a little bit more about that from your perspective. What usually are the ethical considerations when you're implementing AI in the workplace? And where should you begin quite practically if you're thinking about this too?
So you should start thinking about fairness and bias, right? But in addition, there are two angles, right? So oftentimes companies buy solutions that have AI embedded in them. And from a procurement and supply chain perspective, it's really understanding that chain of custody and that provenance around what data that algorithm was built upon. And if it was designed and trained and tested in a manner that really prompted the CTO or the CEO that developed that product, or the engineers that developed that product, to ask the right questions as they were building and training and testing the algorithm. So on the one hand, there is the supply chain, right? Buying off-the-shelf solutions that have AI already embedded in it. And we also have to understand that oftentimes AI is a black box. So by the time it gets to making a procurement decision, we find organizations don't really know which questions to ask to make sure that the algorithm was trained in a rich data set that was diverse and didn't promote the biases of the engineers that created what was implemented and sold to them. If you're developing machine learning and AI algorithms in-house, what we've done through our programs is we've developed a framework. Now, everyone has a framework, but our framework is based around helping startup founders ask the right questions of their data set, right? It's helping them to really codify where they got the data. Is it representative enough? And once the model is trained and it's operationalized within an organization, keeping track of how that algorithm is being used and what new data, what new iterations that was mentioned earlier before is being fed into that data to train it even more. So there's two aspects to it. One of the procurement of AI and making sure that what you're buying actually went through that sense check, but also developing algorithms in-house and the right procedures around operationalizing what's embedded into your business as usual systems.
Thanks, Simone. And before we move into the future trends, I suppose, when it comes to adoption in AI, I want to tackle a couple of questions here before we move on. One here I'm going to put to Kai, given you touched upon it. Where does implementation start? Is it top down or is it bottom up? How do you usually see this in an organization?
I would say the answer is top down, but not maybe in the ordinary sense. The leadership must show that this is important and encourage everyone in the organization to start to implement and to learn what AI is, because otherwise you have very unconstructive discussions around AI. Obviously, it needs to happen everywhere in the organization, but the leadership needs to own it and provide the tools and the data infrastructure so the organization can actually start to work with it.
Any comment there, Dimitri or Errol? Is that what you see in your work?
I've seen both, and I've seen both fail and I've seen both work as well. I think it truly depends on how good companies are at isolating this effort as well. I think that the main factor here is not top down or bottoms up, is rather, can we start initiatives in, especially companies with a large legacy organization, on the side? Because if we start by integrating them into the organization to follow all governance, all processes and all structures, they're most likely going to fail because there are too many stakeholders, there's new ways of working that's not adopted to. So the best I've seen here is actually setting something up on the side, and then when it's working, start to integrate it slowly into the organization. That's how you're going to drive most of the business benefits, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I agree. The step-by-step approach, I have seen it working many times now. And I think, even if you go bottom up, there's got to be some degree of buy-in, because at some point you will need to change the way you work, right? And at least there's got to be some degree of agreement with the organization, even if not active involvement, but at least some coherent, process moving in the same direction, at the very least, for it to succeed.
In the areas, if I can just chime in really quickly, the clients I've worked with where they've been successful, in the first instance, they've come to the Catapult experiment, right, to innovate on a use case. But when we take a step back and really start asking about their data, what ends up happening is they go on a data transformation journey before actually going on an AI journey. And those are the clients we find are more successful in institutionalizing the processes that were mentioned, but as well as the technology and the outcomes they're seeking within their organization.
Yeah. So let me challenge this slightly. So I have seen this a few times, been very successful as well. What I have seen now in practice a few times as well is sometimes it does work to go both ways, right? It's a two-way road. And the reason is sometimes the organization starts working on the machine learning use case and they realize that it's not about the data they have, it's about that they don't have. Yeah. So unless they have already poked it a little bit and they understand, they have an idea of what kind of data they would need, that they might go through the journey and realize, well, this is excellent, we have all the data, but that's not actually what we need. And so they have to go through this again.
And I also see, when you look on where we're going right now, we're still early stage adaptation. And I like to talk about legacy companies because I work for them and I've done so for many years. And they're probably going to make a lot of impact if they get this right. It's like today you start seeing AI and some companies starting to see the benefits. But what I also see as well is that when companies have reached a certain level of maturity, very few have so far in these companies, you start seeing them challenging their existing business models, because I see two parts of this. One is improving existing business processes, and you can only do that so much. The other part is inventing new ones that will unlock a tremendous amount of value. It's like they say in the new Spotify pod, you can be very high on a small mountain or very wide on a wide one. And it's like we're going over now to a wider mountain, and machine learning and AI is unlocking more business processes, more value for not just these companies, but for the entire world.
I think one success factor is also about knowing what goal are we reaching for. A lot of companies are just going out there, okay, we want to work with AI without really knowing what are we doing. So very surprisingly, when we work with the healthcare sector, it's been surprisingly easy to get everyone on board because it's so clear for them, we're here to help people to better health. But in a big private organization, different people in different departments have different reasons for why they go to work.
To all of you on the panel there, do you think that's evolving now over time? Really, as AI becomes more commonplace across a number of use cases, do you find procurers are now going out with the explicit goal of procuring AI, or are they increasingly just focused on a solution to their problem?
all of those. And I see fantastic variety there and success in every kind of shape here. So some organization would say, look, this is essential to our future value proposition, and we have to move in the AI and machine learning direction strategically. Some would say, well, we don't really care that much because we have a task, and however we solve the task, that's what we care about. And there's no right or wrong here. I've seen both work very well.
Yeah, I echo the point on there's no right or wrong. So at the Catapult, we focus on manufacturing and creative. And from a manufacturing perspective, they very much come with a narrowly defined problem that they want to apply AI to. So it's very nuanced and very crunched.
Yeah. And I know there's a panel dedicated to this afterwards, so I won't deep dive into it, but I'd be keen to tackle our top rated question here, which is how do you assure that data is diverse enough to make AI useful, and pointing to the challenges, I guess, of facial recognition. Kai, you have your hand up there. I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I think it's a super important question, but it's equally important to be honest with ourselves that we are not diverse or unbiased today.
Yeah.
And data provides a great opportunity for us to be transparent around how we are biased, and to challenge and to actually get that information. If you apply for a loan in a bank, you are being treated differently depending on who you are. But today you can't really challenge that. But in the future, we might be able to challenge that because of data and regulations.
I think this is a bigger question than just diverse enough. I think this is an ethical question that kind of is imperative for the age that we are in. We can use this technology that we're now developing in several different directions. We can choose to do bad with it, or we can choose to do good with it. And I think we actively should do good with it. We should ban the bad applications of AI, and we should continuously monitor. That's why I welcome the new EU regulations that's out. And I think they're a good first stand of setting the direction for Europe on where we want to take AI in the future. And we can be a role model for the rest of the world on how we treat data and how we work with AI in all different kinds of applications.
And I think our elected leaders or politicians have a great responsibility in pointing out and painting up what future we want to create, and doing that work, because they have to support the private organizations with economic incentives to choose the long-term goals over the 1 year stock benefits, the revenue, the short-term revenue.
From a data diversity aspect, I think there's a fundamentals in that AI is developed by humans and we are inherently biased. So the example I can give is, so I'm originally from the Caribbean, and oftentimes when I go back and liaise with the innovation community there, I sit there and I think, if I'd never left and I'd been building a product based from my home country, all of my developers and my engineering team would look like me. That's not diverse in any sense of the form, right? So it's all around how do you bring in different perspectives as you collect your data sets, as you allocate which data would need to be trained to feed and test the model, right? And it works both ways. It works from a Caribbean perspective, India is high on the tech radar, a Southeast Asian perspective, but also a European perspective. It's the diversity in the team and experiences and the data that is being fed.
And one final question I want to throw to the group is around, I suppose, hype and impact in AI. And thinking about, I very much come from the startup world. And a few years ago, AI first companies were very nascent. Only 3-4 years ago, very few were reaching any meaningful scale. And maybe you could point to Darktrace, Benevolent AI, GraphCore, but it was still relatively early. And now we're seeing, I suppose, a real surge of companies at scale. I'd love to know from the panel, how are you finding that in the enterprise and in the workplace? Are you seeing now AI really deliver meaningful impact beyond the hype that was set for it?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I see every day, to be honest. And actually, we have calculated this year, we looked at how many customers are using machine learning in production. And after we've done it, we came up with a number of 100,000 this year. And it's been a very, very big leap. But then also my personal observation, every day I see machine learning implementations as I go about my daily business. And unless you work in this space, You may not realize that this is how it's done, but I think it's a big sign that the technology is really becoming ubiquitous, that you stop noticing it unless you know specifically what you're looking at.
The barriers of entry has really come down, so it's much easier to access the value. Different vendors have provided solution that makes it easy for us to come as companies to work with these type of tools. Still, there is a skill shortage. So, I mean, we haven't seen the full benefits of AI being implemented in different organizations yet. We're struggling with this heavily in H&M, but still, every day we see it in production and we see more and more usage of it.
Brilliant. Well, it's been a great chat. We've got a minute left, and I see somebody here has taken the thunder out of my final question, which was going to be exactly that. So thanks for posting it there. But I'd love to get a sense from each of you in terms of your closing thoughts. What would be your one piece of advice for enterprises looking to use and adopt AI in the workplace, and a bonus point for any resources or organizations you can point them to? Starting with Dimitri, maybe.
Yes, I'd say definitely look at organizational aspect way before looking into technology and experimentation. Just think of it as technology is there. It really is today. So start with organization first. And in terms of resources, we have a guide, a step-by-step guide. This is called a well-architected guide for machine learning, where we go on step-by-step what we need to think about. But there are other methodologies out there, and the principle is, really think about organization first. Don't worry about technology; it is there.
And Kai,
I would say the management group needs to read the Essential AI Handbook for Leaders, and should probably just put that in the hands of everyone in the organization. It's a 30-minute read. It's available free as a PDF online, and make sure that you can start that the discussion naturally happens at the coffee machine.
And Simone?
I echo the points in terms of business value first versus technology. That's with any technology that an enterprise is looking to implement. But I would harp on again about data. Once you figure out what value it can bring, then start having a look at your data. And I mean data for AI, not data for analytics. In terms of resources, there's this gentleman I follow on Twitter, Andy Eng. He founded Coursera, but he is a leader that is high in the R&D space within AI. But what I like about him is that he democratizes it, and he speaks to it as if you're three, which is amazing.
Thanks, Simone. And last but certainly not least, Errol.
Thank you. Incremental value delivery is the key word here. Don't hire people that say they're going to take 3 years to deliver value. You need to start seeing value almost from the first deliverable in the first PI planning. Google has a good saying, which I try to follow, which is first build a very simple model, then end-to-end infrastructure, very easy today. Then you go for optimization and build the more advanced things. If you're able to do that, then you will be successful with AI as well.
Brilliant. So I hope you'll all join me for a virtual round of applause for all of our panelists. Dimitri, Simone, Kai, Errol, thanks so much for your time. It's been a great panel, great to hear your insights. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to the team. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harry, and the panel. I hope it has given many of you watching around the world some ideas of how you might incorporate AI into your business or organization. Before we go into the next panel discussion, a quick reminder to let you know this is an interactive session, and I encourage you to use the Q&A function for comments and questions. I know a lot of you already have been getting involved with that. Transportation is a sector that is driving forward some of the most advanced, exciting AI. A lot of AI solutions work behind the scenes, but autonomous vehicles put AI front and center and have really captured the general public's imagination. Today, George Philippe, Knowledge Transfer Manager for Connected and Automated Vehicles at the Knowledge Transfer Network, will be leading our panel focusing on AI as a driver for smart transportation. George is a bit of a star in the transport sector, having helped organisations win more than £60 million in R&D grants, as well as achieve project value of more than £90 million. Over to you, George.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. We have with us today three very important speakers from 3 different sectors, actually, that should make this conversation a lot more interesting. And they will be tackling the important and sometimes difficult subject of AI as a driver for smart transportation. I would like to ask each of them individually to introduce themselves and actually offer some opening remarks about their opinions on this important topic. So if you can start with Zain from the Connected Places Catapult.
Thanks, Raj. Yeah, I'm Zain. I've been at the Connected Places Catapult for about just over 4 years, and we're part of the same innovation network as the Digital Catwalk that we heard from earlier today. We're a non-profit. We have a role somewhere between government and industry and academia. And at the Catapult, my focus has been on the safety of autonomous vehicles. We've ran several key projects working closely with the government, Music and Certicav, where we've started looking at a safety assurance framework for autonomous vehicles. And before I was at the Catapult, I worked in AI research, both in academia and in industry. And I think people have realized in the last 10 years that autonomous cars are a game changer. We can have a lot of consumer convenience benefits when you can read a book, watch a movie, sleep, or work whilst you're being driven places by your car. But quite importantly, there's a huge safety driver as well. We can reduce the massive number of collisions caused by and serious injuries and fatalities caused by human drivers around the world every year. And this has been going on since the sort of modern era started in 2005 with the DARPA Grand Challenges. And then a few years after that, Google started their autonomous car program, which is now run by the alphabet company Waymo. In the past couple of years, it's been apparent to everyone this is an incredibly hard problem. And it's really the driving task is pushing the boundaries of what AI is capable of. So fully autonomous vehicles are a way off still. And one of the things that is quite important to make them possible is the safety assurance side, which is what we've been looking at, making sure that they are going to be safer than human drivers when they are released to the public. Thanks, George.
Thank you very much, Zain. I think next should be William, because I might expect that he might have something to reply to your opening remarks. William?
Hello, my name is William. I'm the founder of a company called the Academy of Robotics. As I'm doing this introduction, I'm going to do a quick 10-second walk. I'd like to introduce you to something. So in front of me is Cargo. Cargo is Europe's first street legal, can you close it please, autonomous delivery vehicle. As you can see, this vehicle has a number plate. It is on the road as we speak. It does deliveries here in the UK. So Cargo was made by us. We make the car. We make all the technology around the car, and it opens up the back when it arrives at your house to do deliveries autonomously. So autonomous vehicles are actually here. Here's one right in front of you. This is Cargo. We're going to go back and sit down, and then we'll speak later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, William. And you probably are winning the prize for probably the best opening remarks sequence so far, at least. Next, we have Hamid. Hamid?
Yes, it was fantastic, William. It was really nice seeing it in live. Anyways, Hamid Zargampur, I work for the Swedish Transport Administration, actually the government. And we believe that AI is basically a groundbreaking technology with huge impact on our society, like William showed right a couple of seconds ago. It is here, and things are working really, and it needs AI as well. So the impact is huge, and transportation is not an exemption. This technology, we believe that is an important prerequisite for the future cognitive mobility and applies to all transportation modes, not only roads, but railways, aviation, and maritime. They are all important, and they are going to more or less working with, not less actually, more and more being AI. They need AI applications to work. Actually, I'm talking about a specific AI for solving problems. Swedish Transport Administration, where I work, see it in the AI as important tool for dealing with transportation challenges, such as safety, energy efficiency, and of course, fossil-free transport, where we need actually to reduce the amount of energy within transportation. And we think that with smart grids and AI application, we can do a lot in that area. Is it fine, George?
Yeah, it's perfect, Hamid, and thank you so much. I would like to remind the audience to please ask your questions on Slido. We will try to make time to actually to ask some of them. If you can, please also address the questions to a specific speaker, or if you want, to all of them. My first question, it's actually probably one of the hardest and most difficult questions to ask and to answer is, what do you see as the most profound impact of AI in transport, at least for the near future? Does anyone want to go first, or should I make a pick? Okay, I'll go with William. You are muted, William.
Oh, that's a good thing. Press the button. Yeah, done now. I think when we say profound impact, I think it's more, so self-driving cars are coming, yes, but the impact I think would be on the human experience. So when you go to any building, you look for a light switch, don't you? You press a button and you expect electricity to be there. And I think Wi-Fi and internet has got to that stage as well, where we expect, oh, where's the Wi-Fi password? I have to get online. And I think the profound impact for us as people is we're soon going to get to a point where the idea of traveling to North London from South London, or from one part of the city to another part of a city, is not going to be, oh, that 2-hour commute. It's going to no longer be a thing we think about. Just like the light switch, you press a button, there's electricity there. I think there's going to be a shift on the concept of moving people and moving things. So just like we showed you cargo vehicle outside, you could press a button, it turns up. You put something and I send my mom, I don't know, flowers, or my friend that thing, their keys they left. It'll be that simple that we don't think about it. And I think that will be the profound impact, more the human experience.
Yeah, so it's basically toward the seamless experience and of mobility in the end. Hamid, I saw that you wanted to add something.
Well, this is important what William says, but the thing is that, you know, the AI, it is no longer a choice. Actually, it is here, and we can't do things without AI. We use AI already in many applications. We have it in our mobile phone. We have used it since 2018 for solving various types of problems within our organization, to make planning, doing maintenance better than before. There are so many aspects of AI, and this comes with the huge amount of data which are being collected from sensors, from vehicles, from everything moving around. So they actually provide us with data, and if we are able to analyze this data very quickly and make decisions and be data-driven business, so we have very much benefit of thinking like that.
Yeah. I do get your point. Zane, do you have anything to add on this topic?
I mean, mostly I wanted to agree with William. I think that it's going to be a much easier experience for the user once you have this smart, integrated, connected transport system, and AI is driving a lot of that through the planning and scheduling algorithms that are already in use in some of our sat-nav technologies, and the analysis as well, the ability to monitor and predict and understand traffic patterns means that it's easier to engineer a much more efficient system overall. But that's moving away from autonomous cars slightly. I think we're also going to see quite a lot of increasing automation in cars you can go out and buy, and definitely in vehicles that deliver you goods and services, such as William's car. And this is probably going to be assisted autonomy. So I think the interesting thing is going to be the interaction of the humans and the machines here. And this is not just something that's happening quickly in the road domain, it's also happening maritime and air domain, where in some ways the limiting factor is making sure that the human is alert and supervising the machine and they can work together well. So that's an interesting challenge for the near term.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, and I think we're still a way to go till we reach those features. But moving from the realm of today and in the near future, what do you think that we can expect that was not imaginable before, like 5 years, 10 years ago, things that we could not imagine back then? Do you think they are moving into the realm of possibilities? And if yes, which are those things? Can you start with Hamid?
Well, there are many things are being possible these days, and every time I wake up, I'm not getting surprised anymore what people have done and what startups come up with. So it is a tremendous changes, and just in comparison to 5 years ago, we have much safer vehicles coming to our systems. You couldn't imagine that, only using the advanced driving assist for many cars today, it makes our roads much more safer. We are using it in railways, how to make automation, automated maintenance much better. Also, with some other features that helps the driver in both train and also vehicle to help them to actually deal with the very complicated task as the task of driving, to make sure that they can do it even better. So things are getting better and better, and I'm sure that it will be even better in future.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Hamid. William, I suppose you can be seen as a sort of a futurist. So what do you see in the realm of possibilities that were not before?
So I think if you go to the, thank you for that, by the way. If you go to maybe, I remember seeing an interview from one of the founders of Google who said pre-2005, everybody knew that machine learning just didn't work because we didn't have the compute power for it. So it was this abstract concept that we never really knew it was going to work. And so past 2005, suddenly we have supercomputers and the computers we used to run these cars. This tech just didn't exist 5-10 years ago. And I think the tech that is coming, or some of the tech we're working on, it's really hard to predict because everything else evolves with it. So for example, our habits evolve with it. So I'm not going to be so brave as to say the future is going to be some very specific thing, but I'll tell you what's around the corner: autonomous delivery everywhere. And I know this because we're working on it.
Perfect. Thank you very much, William. Zane?
I'd just like to comment that in today's cars, you have speed limit sign recognition. And I suspect, I mean, I don't know for sure, but I suspect that's using sophisticated deep learning systems to drive that. So you're seeing what was academic research 10 years ago in production cars. And I think that's quite exciting.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Because we're actually, I see a lot of questions coming through. I was actually thinking of moving it towards there. So the first question is actually, what comes first? Is it innovation or is it legislation? I will start with Hamid again because he's coming from a road authority.
Well, this is very, very good question, actually. What is important to come first? But you know what? We human beings, we invented fire before we started to write the legislation about how to deal with the fire. We also invented electricity before we knew that electricity is very important to be regulated. So it is not a matter of what is coming first. It is actually being developed parallel into each other. So I believe that we are going to test at the same time that we also put in place a regulation that it works. And when it comes to AI and the regulation, it is also very important. 100 years ago, we built this infrastructure. We have this system we have today and cars, and we know what kind of dangerous system it is today and what kind of problems we have today. So what we are doing now and what is being our infrastructure in years from now, and what kind of challenges our children are sitting and thinking of that they at that time they didn't think about that and didn't regulate. It's become very important issues to consider when we talk about implementing new innovative solutions. So we need to ensure regulatory compliance and best practice best practices around ethical issues when we talk AI. Very important to be considered when we talk about AI and its application.
Exactly. It makes perfect sense, and it is always a hard question to answer because you do not want the legislation to stifle the innovation, but in the same time, you do need it there. The next question I actually want to address to William. So, in your opinion, what fuel will automated vehicles ideally run on in the future? So, do you see a preference for your own product or a trend for it, I suppose?
Okay, I think some sort of electrification is the way forward, is the right way to go. But then there's that sort of catch-22 that it's expensive to produce the lithium as well. Do we have enough lithium on Earth to mine to do all these cars? But I was more interested in your previous question about what comes first, innovation or legislation, because a very specific industry. So very specific example I can give. What we found is some countries have started legislating to say that you need a sort of a button you can press to remotely stop autonomous cars. That's an example. The legislation is there before the car companies can do it. Now, we were lucky enough that we're in the industry where we make the cars and we also make the command hubs, the ways to and when we're doing that, we found that the way the legislation is framed, that's actually a really bad idea because of something called latency. And they've structured the legislation so everyone's going to start going that direction to tick that legislative box. But if you do it that way, you've actually caused one of the biggest safety issues in the industry if it's not done correctly, because there's so many variables that go into that. I mean, I've got a fantastic solution, which I would love to tell you about, but not today, because my PR team will go crazy. But in general, I think innovation should come first. And ideally, the legislators work closely with the innovators to see where the breakpoints are. Because if you set the innovation first, it just becomes a target that is not considered as to what are the further impacts. So you research first.
Exactly. Exactly. And I should point out here, this is a great timing that CCAP has just launched yesterday a new call for evidence where all innovators and all people in the industries can actually have their input on the future of connected and automated vehicles in the UK. So feel free to have your say there. Next question is for Zane, I think, because you do work at the Connected Places Catapult, who is one of the most important organizations when it's about collaboration. So how do you see that public and private bodies should cooperate in the end? And what do you see as the agreements and disagreements there in that relationship?
I think in the UK, the public bodies are really good in recognizing that we have to support innovation, and we do everything we can to grow the economy and support startups. I think that the collaborative research and development grants are a really good mechanism to let this cooperation happen, and I hope we see more of that in the future. And I think that there's collaboration that's definitely needed, as William says, on things like standards and regulations, where we need to hear from both sides. We need to get both perspectives to get regulations that work for everyone. And there are lots of forums in which this is happening. For example, standards bodies and the UNECE work in Europe.
Yeah, it's perfect. And thank you very much, Zane. I'm seeing the timer with my left on my left side, and I'm getting a bit anxious because we only have 1 minute and a half. So I would like to give you all three the opportunity to actually have some closing remarks and address the audience directly. So we can start again with Hamid. You are on my left.
Yes.
So
a lot of things are going on. A lot of good things are going on. Also, when it comes to energy, it becomes very important that we have a fossil-free transportation system in place very, very soon. Electrification of roads, electricity, and also hydrogen becomes very important. Even other systems, they are complementing each other. They are not only one of those is the solution towards fossil-free transport, and automation, of course, very important in the future.
Perfect. Thank you very much, William.
So thank you. In 2020, it was not one of the big companies, IBM, Google, who was the first to put autonomous delivery vehicles on the road. It was us, a small company nobody's ever heard of. Did it through the Driver Vehicle Licensing Agency and the DVSA here in the UK. We exist because we're literally funded by individuals, literally people at home who funded, we literally crowdfunded. And in the space of 2-3 years, we matched some of the biggest companies in the world. So to continue furthering our growth, do look us up. We're called Academy of Robotics. If you know anyone who wants to throw funding or anything like that our way, just look at our website, send them to us. We'll be very interested to have a chat. So we're Academy of Robotics, and the car you saw is called Cargo.
Thank you very much, William. Zane?
Yeah, just to say, I'm really looking forward to the next few years when we start seeing more and more automation on the roads, both in delivery systems and in partial automation, such as automated lane keeping systems that are about to be legalized in the UK.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank our audience as well. Hope you will have a really nice event going forward. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, George, and the rest of the panel for that deep dive into how AI is being used in the transport sector. It was extremely cool to see that autonomous vehicle in action as well. Now it is time for the second coffee break of the afternoon. You won't want to miss the final session of our event, where we'll be exploring the tech of tomorrow that is sparking the interest of leading investors. We'll also be talking to Elena Firstman, Research Director of Artificial Intelligence at Ericsson, about the trustworthiness of AI and examining the ethical dilemma AI presents, which has been touched on in many of the previous discussions. Stay tuned. Welcome back. We are now full steam ahead into our next panel, led by Erica Bjorklund, Director of Corporate Finance and Growth here at SEB. Erica has vast investment experience and a passion for technology, making her an exceptional moderator for the Investing in the Tech of Tomorrow panel. Over to you, Erica.
Hi, my name is Erica Bjorklund. I have the pleasure to host this panel now. And I'm with SEB Corporate Finance Growth in Stockholm. And with me today, I have a great panel. Carlo Biju, Axel Partners, Vinut Jayakumar, Draper Spree, and Magda Lukacevic, Balderton Capital. So in order to sort of cover the topic, investing in the tech of tomorrow and AI, starting off, AI is a very broadly used term within the companies that we meet on a regular basis. How do you think about it, i.e. AI, when making investment decisions? Do you see that as a sort of a norm these days, or actually an edge when you make your decisions? Magda, should we start with you?
Yeah, sure. I will have a go. So there's lots of AI applications in technology in general. So I would say AI as such is, at least from our perspective at Balderton, is neither a positive or a negative. But how we think about it is that it's really important for us when we look at the company to really understand how essential AI is for the business, and where in the business and how it's used, and what kind of edge or advantage it is creating. So personally, I think the more interesting question in general, especially at relatively early stages where we invest, is how data-driven and technology advanced the company is. Because if they have the data, it's then sort of often the next step is sort of to build AI applications on top of that and be able to utilize that data. But if they aren't that forward on the data side, it sort of becomes a harder two-step process where you first need to get the data and then think about AI, and then that's just like a little bit further out. That is at least in the context where AI is not itself that we're investing in, but it's more a part of an investment or a method to do something.
I think that's also broadly the same in terms of how we see the world at Excel. There are certainly, as you mentioned, Magda, some sectors you think about, for example, cybersecurity, where for some solution, actually AI is something quite disruptive still to these days, because historically people haven't trusted that much. So an AI that works, that actually can be an edge, but in general, throughout e-commerce or any kind of, consumer application, we see it as a given, something that is part pretty much of any business that we look at today.
I put it as a very simplistic, necessary but not sufficient characteristic.
Yeah, fair enough. And when you look at AI, do you see more benefits from it in a more vertical or specific application, or in horizontal, broader applications? Carlo, maybe you want to start.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's there is space for both. I think you have benefits in both. But if you think about like vertical specific solution, those are actually quite key use cases for AI, especially more on the early days. So a few examples. So if you look at fraud prevention, for example, that's a quintessential way of using data AI model, to actually find the fraudster. And that's a very vertical specific focus, can be around insurance, for example, where it's very common. Same thing with claim management, also in insurance, or anything that is in synthetic data generation, for example. Those are, I think, verticals that are so data intensive and so model intensive that actually being really focused on that is a requirement for you to be successful. I think another category where we spend a lot of time also within specific versus horizontal is anything around the pick and shovel of AI and machine learning, which is looking at the company that actually enables you to build better AI models, manage your data better, monitor AI models. So I think there is space for both, but certainly in the early days, the vertical specifics were the one where AI had a faster benefit, I would say.
I might just add, Erica, that some of the things that we think about is, to Carlos' point, the verticalization of an AI application enables earlier and quicker traction because it is driven specifically into an industry, is driven specifically into a use case. A lot of what we spent time on was on self-driving use cases, going from level 1 all the way to level 5 autonomous driving. Within that, you have various different AI use cases. And some of the interesting things Carlo points out in the cybersecurity and in the fintech world, fraud is a huge use case. Part of the reason for that is because the attack vectors are continuing to evolve significantly. So what you need is an intelligence layer that's able to study various different verticals in real time, in milliseconds. So, Axel are investors in a company called Shift. We're investors in a company called Ravelin. All of them are thinking about full stack AI in a specific vertical. Now, the case for general horizontal AI is also equally interesting in the sense that what you are trying to do there typically with sort of my investor hat on is you're trying to de-risk up to 2 rounds forward. So you're buying the vision and you're thinking about a round big enough that you may be able to create beachheads, at least 3 or 4 different beachheads. So that's kind of our broad thinking around that.
Magda, do you want to add something to this?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, I agree a lot about what's been said. So I'm not gonna repeat that. We see great successes on both sides, but agree that I mean, the more horizontal approach can in some cases, at least in the early side, can take a little bit. Sometimes, I mean, at least from the companies that I've been looking at recently, can take a little bit longer to get to product market fit, and I mean, find the right use cases, and not only having a great technology, but also that the counterparty is ready to buy it and to implement it, and that can sometimes be a challenge. So, I mean, if I look at our portfolio, most of the bets not all, but most of the bets that we have that relate to AI have been more vertical than horizontal in general.
And tagging along to actually what you said now, sort of on the buyer side, have you all seen sort of that it's easier for sort of the customers of the products in order to accept it for a sort of more narrow area in order to be able to adapt it into their own businesses as well?
Yeah, definitely. And now, I mean, most of the bigger companies have, I mean, at least spent a little bit more time like understanding the needs that they have internally and the structure for working with AI. So that also makes the sales processes a little bit easier.
Yeah. Perfect. And if you sort of think about more what the potential for the companies are, how do you think about AI in terms of revenue opportunities versus cost efficiency? And also maybe to some extent adding to that, what sectors do you sort of see the largest potential in? You sort of touched upon it a bit, Carlo, previously, but sort of maybe if we can elaborate a bit on that.
Happy to. So I think, frankly, so for us, what is key when looking at AI, this being at the vertical or the horizontal level, is to speak with the customers in each industry to understand what is, the usual use case for AI. Is it to save cost or is it to increment revenues? So say broadly, the areas where I think the sectors where there's a highest benefit, both in cost and revenues for us, has been at least financial services, anything e-commerce and retail, and on the manufacturing and heavy industries. And if you look at the 3 verticals, for example, financial services, you have benefits both from the revenues perspective. You can cross-sell, but you can also automate customer service. That's on the cost side. If you look at e-commerce and retail, it's mostly around, actually increasing the top line, personalization, for example, while reaching to customers, virtual fitting rooms. So, you actually hope to convert more customers. And on the manufacturing side, it's actually mostly cost reduction. We have a business in the heavy industry space called Cognite in Norway, which what they do, they pretty much help you to predictive maintenance better, automate troubleshooting. And I would say for each industry, there are sometimes more revenue or cost focus. Historically, though, my understanding of the industry is that anything that helps you decrease your cost is actually and what I'm trying to say is that if you come to somebody, to a large organization and say, hey, I'm going to reduce your cost by 50% in 1 month, people will be very reactive to it. Revenue sometimes can be like, wishful thinking, because, it's a bit more difficult, selling the top line in my experience is a bit more difficult than actually the selling the cost reduction. But maybe, Magda and Vinod, you guys have different experience.
Yeah, I mean, I have a little bit of a different view. I mean, the way that we think about like the interesting applications of AI and revenue as cost is, I mean, either solving one very valuable problem that is really, really hard to do without. Some might be a little bit biased towards one of our investments, but I think Helix in drug discovery is extremely interesting, and it's a case where it actually helps find new combinations of drugs or of rare diseases. So in such an example, it's a very binary outcome where the AI can help, and that's of course on the on both the top line and the cost side actually. But the other side of it is that there could also be many smaller issues that appear very often that where AI can really support, and that will clearly be on the cost side. So I think, I mean, more specific examples of that could be route optimization in logistics or in last mile delivery. Another example could be in certain aspects of customer service, like many frequent transactions where the support of AI can cut costs on each side.
From my experience, we tend to have conversations with entrepreneurs who are either on one side of that equation. You're either optimizing for lower cost, or you're either creating synergies for revenue, right? But what is interesting is when they're on either side of that equation and they're able to connect the dots to the other side, it becomes an accelerant of the business. And the reason is because for each side of that equation, it affects how you price the product. So if you're in a bank and you're doing AI for cost efficiency on onboarding clients or for reducing fraud, then there's an ROI on it. And that ROI is associated to the way in which you price the product, which is associated to how you will grow the company. But if that very same ROI is then connected to how your top line grows, you have a double whammy acceleration. And that is what becomes really, really interesting. Not many companies think about how it applies to the top line, because the way in which software is bought and sold is either on CapEx or OpEx. And so if you are in an equation where you're talking about someone's CapEx, it's quite difficult to shift it to an OpEx. So there is an element as to how it is bought and sold, but the best companies are creating leverage on both sides of that equation.
Good point.
Interesting and true. We've spoken quite a lot about the opportunities of AI, but of course, there are also some threats. And when you are looking at companies that have a lot of AI sort of included in their tech stack or in their applications, sort of what are your key focus areas in your due diligence? Vinod, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, we're generally product-led in how we make our due diligence decisions. So the first step is generally speaking to the clients to find out if it does what it says on the tin. The second step is in understanding how truly deep stack is the deep learning models inside of the AI. And sometimes we get external help, we can pay for that, or sometimes we do it through internal networks of advisors. But your point about how do we allocate risk? We allocate risk based on thinking about, is this product specifically going to drive value for a client? Because the AI in the way the AI software in the way in which it may have been designed may not be the eventual company that generates the large outcome. So we don't want to be dogmatically viewing a specific company and a specific piece of AI in what it says it does. Because what we don't know is how much we're not knowing about how big the world could be. And so we try to optimize for success by sort of listening for actually the signs that tell us that this is going to accelerate in a certain way. That's a long way of saying we don't focus too much on, does this AI specifically work in the way it says it should work? Instead, we focus on what does it do now and what could it do in the future? Can it do what it says in the future?
Yeah.
Carlo, anything?
Yeah, and yeah, that's broadly also how obviously we do our diligence. As we know, like, we do internal work. When it's really deep tech, obviously, sometimes we use the help of external parties. I think that the first point Vinod made is excellent, because a lot of people, can claim there's a great AI, but then the reality is that if they're paying customers or even like POC customers, if I call Ericsson that is using like an AI solution, I trust they understand the tech better than me. So if they're happy with what they're using and they're using it internally, and they're building critical applications or workflow around it, then that must be good. So customer calling is key, especially when the solution is quite complex. I think one of the things that I would add is that because AI, when it's done, I would say at scale, uses a lot of data. One of the things we focus on is that it can be a risk is how is data collection and the data part done? Because AI is built using a lot of data, but the data needs to be harvested from the internet of whatever is the source in a compliant way, in a regulatory approved way. So we actually look at hey, is it focused on maybe a silly example, screen scraping, or something that probably is not going to be scalable in 5 years from now. And also, what is the quality of the data set? If there's any moat around that part. And most of the time there's really no moat around data, because at the end of the day, most of the data is public accessible. But the secret sauce, is around how you manage the pipelines of those data, how do you monitor the variance of those data, pretty much what is called data quality today.
Magda?
Yeah, I mean, the couple of things that I would add is how we look at it internally is that, the decision of how deep to go in a deal is obviously always skewed towards how important the AI is for the business. But assuming it's advanced, I think the strongest, at least, at the stage where we invest, there is often some level of commercial traction. So getting to understand or looking at the specific use cases and how they scale over time is super, super important. We're not reviewing the code, so that's not what our strength is. But in general, we are, at least when it comes to the ethical challenges that can sometimes pop up in the use of AI, especially recently, I think it's really important to be careful about the people and the founders that we back, because in the end, it's a lot of their judgments that will be used in how this data and these models are used. So we always have an ethical decision. It's not only when it comes to AI, but in general when it comes to data usage and privacy, where that always comes up as a question and something that we discuss internally in the team and mention in our investment memos.
Great, thank you very much. You all invest in sort of relatively early stage companies and investing a lot in their vision, long-term vision to some extent. How do you balance that with sort of the fund requirements of a return and the limited time period you still are sort of living with to some extent? Vinod, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we fundamentally changed our models. So we listed ourselves, we IPO'd in summer of 2016. And as a result, we're actually investing on balance sheet. And therefore, our investing model becomes patient capital by definition. We have no 5+5 or 10-year windows on how long we need to stay invested. We can stay invested for as long as we need to be, and we can keep deploying capital all the way through that journey. So we fundamentally changed, because we looked into our returns from our greatest companies, and they generally came from assets that were more than 9, 10, 11 years old. So in a lot of ways, it made sense for us to do that. And we're backed by the major public listed funds who want to do the next big IPOs. So in a lot of ways, we're continuing the funding journey, as it were, for our companies.
And then, Carlo, briefly before we are running out of time, just a comment from your side, if I may.
Of course, very, very quickly. I think frankly, our average investment period throughout our portfolio is around 8 to 9 years. So I mean, maybe I'm not sure that is considered short, but I would say in general, I mean, the question that we ask ourselves, if you very simplistically, if you have to generate fund return, you don't really care about the short term. I don't really care about PR. I just care about, are we building a great business in the long term? So that's how I would put it. But obviously, if you take a strategic decision of investing in computer vision, you might have 4 years when the company is building a product because it takes a lot of time. And then, maybe in the next, 5 to 6 years, then, you start seeing some results. Whilst if you invest today in a chatbot, customer service automation, obviously you will see some traction. I think, as long as you agree beforehand with entrepreneurs, what is that you want to build, and in our case is, as I'm sure it is for Vinod and Magda, large business over a long period of time, I think you're fine.
Yeah. Well, great.
The only thing I would add to that would be that it's important that the funding matches the milestones that the company reaches. So I mean, sometimes in very research heavy businesses, as Carla mentioned, can take 6 years before where things are going. And for that type of company, it might be hard when they are 3 years into the journey. And I mean, there is nothing proven other than a lot of work. It might be hard to get additional capital. So that's something that that affects the decisions that we make, at least.
Yeah, definitely, clearly. Great. Thank you all for a great panel discussion. Handing back now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erica, and the rest of the panel for such valuable insights. Now we are extremely lucky to be joined by Elena Fersman, Research Director of Artificial Intelligence at Ericsson. Elena is an absolute rock star, managing teams of researchers across the world. Today, she will be discussing the trustworthiness of AI. Over to you, Elena.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Matthew. And hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. And I will be talking about trustworthiness of AI and specifically applied to telecom networks, because I do come from Ericsson, and at Ericsson, I lead a team of researchers. So I belong to Ericsson Research, where we will work on the latest AI algorithm, including their trustworthiness. I do also work as an adjunct professor at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, in addition to that. So let's start with looking at the telecom system as such. So the telecom system, which is currently a 5G being deployed all over the world, in every generation, the complexity is growing. With 2G networks, it was reconnecting people through voice, right? 3G networks were already about data, but that data was mostly used by operators, by the providers themselves. 4G is already a platform offering a lot of data and services to build application on top of. So the 4G is already used by many different businesses to build the applications on top of that. 5G is the absolutely biggest shift in the telecom networks, because not only it goes faster and higher bandwidth, it also has some unique capabilities, allowing for very differentiated quality of service, very cool use cases. As you can see here, we can support augmented reality with 5G. We can support robotics. There can be collaborative robotics when you have humans and robots collaborating with each other. The robots are relying on the telecom network, so it all becomes very kind of mission critical application because humans are involved in working with these devices. Connected transportation and optimization of that, autonomous driving and smart manufacturing that is supposed to run autonomously and with a minimum climate footprint as well. So it is a complex system, and complex systems do require quite sophisticated algorithms to be able to manage it in a good way. So the different demands that are on the network are, for example, that the variety of use cases is huge. You can have anything from massive deployment of sensors and actuators, for example, in agriculture use cases, where you have a lot of small devices that require very long battery lifetime, because you don't want to go to a field very often to change the small batteries all the time. So that requires a network that doesn't drain the battery. Then you have on the other kind of side of scale, you have, for example, remote control of heavy machinery, or if you have an autonomous vehicle that doesn't know how to pass a certain route, and then it requests some kind of remote control driving, and then it starts sending a video feed back to the operator that requires really, really high quality of service, that it doesn't fail. Or use cases that are, for example, remote surgery, that you can actually operate a patient remotely or in a vehicle and so on. So in that, network becomes a very critical resource. Of course, there's a lot of data and the variety of devices. I mean, it's not only mobile phones, everything is connected. It requires high security, so there is no data can be tampered with, and good customer experience. How the network is addressing those varying use cases is actually through this flexibility and virtualization. The coolest 5G is that it has this concept on network slice, almost like going from dedicated hardware to virtual machines, when you can kind of start a virtual machine dedicated for some business and then put it down when it's not used anymore. Here, in the same way, you can kind of have a telecom network that looks and feels as if it was your dedicated network with your characteristics that you asked for, but in fact, it's a virtualized instance of a network. Then, of course, edge computing and compute and networking are going hand in hand, where every kind of critical service that needs execution can be executed in the network, or actually send the data somewhere to the cloud to execute. So it is a high complexity, and there's a lot of parameters out there that need to be managed. And AI is a very good tool for that, because there is a lot of data. We kind of said that we are not going to build a standalone artificial intelligence at Ericsson. It is integrated everywhere. It's not built like on the side of telecom. It's integrated into the telecom. And specifically now that we are designing 6G networks, it's kind of AI centric, because if you don't have observability, if you cannot read out the data from the resources from the infrastructure, then you cannot manage them in optimal way. We have this paradigm, we call it AI by design. So it's solving the right problems. And the right problems for us, it means, for example, infrastructure utilization. So when a customer buys an infrastructure, you want to get the best out of this infrastructure. You want to have superior network performance, and you want to have quality of service that you can promise to your customers in their turn. And our customer, it's both consumers and enterprises. And enterprises often they run a very critical services, which will lead me very soon to trustworthiness aspects of the network and AI within the network. We have efficient operations and, of course, energy management and sustainability. Exactly how, like with any industries, a telecom network is, of course, consuming resources. And it's very important to build the networks in a flexible way so that we only run the network where it's being used, to ensure that the energy consumption is kept at minimum and optimized while keeping the performance. So when the network is actually not in use, then it can be powered down so that it doesn't consume the environment. So the paradigm also is that we are looking at what we call zero-touch network or cognitive network. And cognitive network, it means that it's all the processes, starting from the development to actually deployment and rollout of the network, they are supposed to run autonomously. And that's a vision for the network. And as you can see, these arrows that go in parallel as the development of AI in the network goes, where we do actually, we went from manual and reactive networks going into fully automated and proactive networks, where in the beginning we had manual configuration, then some kind of small scripts and applied intelligence to full autonomy and self-running and trustworthiness of the network. In parallel, this trustworthiness of network, it is running all the time But of course, when it's only small algorithms that are being deployed, small scripts that are being deployed in the network, then the trustworthiness of those is much easier to get verified and ensured. The more sophisticated algorithms you're putting into the network and the more data you're using for that, the more trustworthiness, the trickier it gets, of course. And the trickier it gets to explain the decisions that are being taken by the network. So I would say that for me, in this development of the telecom networks through AI, trustworthiness has always come as a hygiene factor in the same time as we are developing the algorithms for the network. So for example, before you actually run an algorithm in a live network, you need to ensure certain qualities of this. And one of the main parts of it is, of course, explainability of the networks, and that's explainability to a human. When a human operator, so we have our big operation centers that are being automated more and more, and meaning that if something unwanted is some kind of undesired behavior is being predicted in the network, then the system figures out the kind of resolution for that. And sometimes the human operator needs to ask why this decision, why is this proposal, because it's not understandable. It's maybe based on a very big neural network or very big machine learning model. So it's a method then to inform and in an understandable way of AI outcome and rationale. And then also ensure confidence in the model, enable human agency and support accountability. So that's the part of explainability. Then, of course, the other part is safe artificial intelligence, where safety function is ensuring that the system actions do not cause harm to environment, and also the fallback mechanism to default and safe behavior. And that part is actually twofold. Safe AI is kind of making sure that there is no negative environmental impact. So we are looking at the energy consumption, of course. And also through the safety critical cases, as I was mentioning, when you have, for example, a human involved in the loop along with the machines that are relying on the telecom network, so that the network as a resource is acting in the proper way and not colliding and not harming any human decisions. So, but trustworthiness as such has a lot of other kind of parameters and components, such as predictability and non-bias and non-discrimination. Of course, it's depending on the data that's being fed into it. And we're relying a lot. We have adopted the EU ethical guidelines, and now recently the proposal for the policy of the AI ethics came. So we've been preparing for it from the start, which I think is extremely important to adhere to. And with that, I would like to see if there are any questions to me. This is my last slide. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Elena. That was extremely interesting to see, the 2030 vision for Ericsson and learn a bit about the trustworthiness of AI. It's certainly been engaging for our audience, and they have got several questions for you. So I will kick straight off with the first one. So you mentioned that Ericsson will have a fully cognitive network by 2030. Do you see any risks of developing such a system? Can it become too powerful, causing us to lose control over it?
So thank you for the question. This question is always very relevant in building any type of autonomy within any industry, I would say. Of course, it's a powerful resource. A network is kind of ubiquitous. We have it everywhere, and then we release an algorithm. Of course, there are risks, but these risks are being taken care of. For example, this ethical policies or this policy proposal that comes that addresses the trustworthiness of AI. So if we have that in mind from the start, and then that policy is actually written, what industries are classified as high risk, for example, and for high risk industries, you need to adhere to the principles. So whenever, I mean, even before you kind of release the algorithm out there, it needs to kind of guarantee certain things. So you need to set the boundary conditions, right? And then, of course, we also need to have this regulatory frameworks where we add a new kind of restriction to the algorithm, and you can feed it into the algorithm and say, okay, we maybe didn't think of it from the start, but now we think this is unethical. Let's enforce this rule. So as long as we build system architectures in the right way, we will be safe.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about continuous management and evolving it, I guess, with legislation as well. So the second question is, as you explained, companies need to take a proactive stance to ensure trustworthiness, such as adopting the EU ethics guidelines, which you've touched on in your presentation and in the response to the first question as well. But following legislation is just the base point. What else needs to be done?
Yeah, that's also a good one. Of course, there are different, I mean, this kind of, I think for me, trustworthiness, it can be summarized, it can be kind of translated into the requirements. So the network has, or like any type of algorithm that we release in there has a bunch of requirements. Well, that may be requirements on performance, that may be requirements on ethics, that may be requirements that come from these legislations that we actually translate and encode. But there are also requirements in every country. There are country laws, there are regulations. Every company has their own set of requirements. So for example, if you're delivering a network to a manufacturing facility somewhere, they may have their set of rules. So I think what needs to be done is that to be clear what kind of rules we are following, and then have a system architecture so that we can kind of feed them into the system so that the algorithm knows where not to go.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you so much for providing those really detailed answers. It was really interesting to hear about how important the architecture is when you plan to develop these things so that you can, as you say, evolve them and adapt them as necessary over time. Thank you so much for the presentation as well. It's been really great to have you here today.
Thank you very much.
No problem at all. Time has flown by, and we have now reached our final panel of the day. Mark Purdy, Senior Advisor at CREAB and Managing Director at Purdy & Associates, will be taking us through the ethical dilemma, something that's been touched on in nearly all of our panel discussions today. We'll be looking at how the issue of ethics relates to what can be developed in the AI space. Mark is a chief economist. He's an expert in business futures and technology, and previously managed Accenture's path-breaking series of studies on AI as the future of growth. Without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Mark.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Great to host the final panel of the day, and I think it promises to be a really interesting one. We're going to be exploring some of the big ethical dilemmas and challenges that AI presents both for business and society. I'm Mark Purdy. I lead a company focused on the economics of AI. I want to sort of start by just asking you to imagine a couple of different situations. I mean, the first situation is, imagine you go for a job interview and you're sitting in front of a terminal and there's an algorithm that's asking you questions and you're responding to that. And then the algorithm uses that information to assess your emotional fit for the role in question. So that's what one sort of scenario to think about. The second is a situation where there's an insurance company that's got drones flying above your neighborhood and is offering discounts on insurance to some households, but not to others. Unfortunately, your house doesn't qualify. And then the kind of third situation is you go to a hospital for a diagnostic check, and an algorithm is used to assess your samples to see whether you have a particular illness or not. So, you know, I mentioned these examples, and there are obviously many more, because the reality is that we're entering a world where important decisions affecting our lives, whether it's recruitment, education, our life chances, they're increasingly being made by machines. So how do we benefit, how do we balance some of the real benefits of AI? So the potential for increased personalization, all the things that we've heard about so far around increased productivity. How do we balance some of those benefits against the risks, the potential for new biases, new inequalities, new exclusions? So to help us answer some of these questions, and it's a lot to do, I admit, in 20 odd minutes, we have a fantastic panel of experts lined up for today's discussion. I'll just briefly introduce each of them, and then they'll each make an opening statement. So first up, we've got Julie Dawson, who is the Director of Regulatory and Policy at Yoti. Yoti is a global digital identity platform with over 10 million users. And what it does is it allows organizations to verify who people are, both online and in person. Next up, we have Anna Fallender, who is the founder of the AI Sustainability Center in Sweden. Anna is one of Sweden's leading experts on the digitalization of organizations and society. Then we have Magnus Strand, who is an associate professor of European law and a senior lecturer at Uppsala University. And Magnus has spent a lot of time looking at the impact of AI in financial markets. And then last but not least, we have Linus Rekblad, who is an innovation advisor. He's also the CEO of IP Screen, which is a company that uses AI to identify new ideas as part of the innovation process. And I'm sure they'll sort of tell you more about the roles as we go through the discussion. So let's sort of begin. And really, our first question is intended to help us try to identify the problem space around the kind of the ethical challenges of AI. And what I would ask each panelist to do is just take 2 minutes to give us your view, your take on the sort of the main ethical issues, dilemmas that we're grappling with when we use AI technologies. And I'll ask Julie to start first. So Julie, over to you.
Thanks very much, Mark. We actually deal with quite a niche and unique sort of application of an AI technology. And it's mainly used to see how old people are. It's an age estimation using facial analysis, but quite helpful because it gives you a real sort of strong case study. So what it's doing is detecting, is this a human face, analysing the age, and then instantly deleting the age with no data retained. But then that poses a whole bunch of questions. So one, we absolutely have to be sure that we're really clear about how well the algorithm handles gender and skin tone, and publish those accuracy levels, the false positives, the false negatives, so how good it is across males, females, different ages, and also explain where those images have come from, how the consented images are derived, how that consent is given. And then we think it's incumbent to actually be really clear how this is actually built under the hood, how it's put to practice, and develop education materials for a whole range of ages, given this is used for younger demographics as well as adults. And then conduct a whole bunch of different stakeholder reviews, so with benchmarking people, with experts, and actually set up appropriate governance around it. So I'd say those are the key things for us. It's looking at the bias, looking at transparency, looking at stakeholder review and explainability, as well as showing clearly the use cases and the commercial model. Thanks, Mark.
Brilliant. Thanks, Julie. So let's move to Anna next.
Thank you so much, Mark. So I'm the founder of the AI Sustainability Center, and we started because we saw that there was a gap of how to lead up to principles for ethical AI and how to do it in practical life. And we start by the foundation is that we have to have a multidisciplinary view on this, hence the legal, the technical, and societal perspective integrated within our framework. And also the organizational view is crucial here. So we have to activate the entire organization, meaning the silos of tech teams, legal team, business area, communication, marketing, and brand needs to be cross-functional. So what we did early in the process was to, from an organizational and societal perspective, not purely an AI perspective on biases, see how we could solve the problem of discrimination, privacy intrusion, lost autonomy, mis and disinformation, and social exclusion. So we started from categorizing this new cloud of digital pollution, saying that we have four pitfalls that are unintended, that has their roots in the organization. And that is immature AI or immature data. That is when the AI hasn't been trained. For example, the face recognition application that was discriminating against Black women, and also when the data is not sufficient enough. And then one other pitfall is the misuse or overuse of data. So even though you are GDPR compliant, AI can create insights that will be privacy intrusive you. So that there's not a balancing act anymore, what we give away of our preferences and behavior and what we get back in efficiency. And the third pitfall is bias of the creator. So when the coder we cannot ask the coder to intuitively code the whole organization's value. That's why this is not an AI team question. It's an organizational question. So the ethical questions has to be on top of the agenda. And then we have data bias, and that is when in a recruitment process, I would be then discriminated because the qualities of a skillful CIO is historically the priorities of white men. So through our framework, we aim to control for these pitfalls to achieve explainability, transparency, accountability, and a governance structure surrounding that. Throughout the framework cases, we visualize ethical dilemmas, and it could be fairness versus precision. So the coder cannot decide whether this balance should be. And another consideration is the accuracy of the model and the explainability of it. Now we have upcoming regulations proposed from the EU saying that you have to have a transparent and explainable way of approaching it. But what if you would be in a situation where you need more accuracy of the model than explainability of it, because it will physically harm me? And also how smart do we want a city to be? How secure do we want our surroundings and our house and our cars to be, not violating our privacy? So it's one thing that you get optimized and tailorized recommendations and services, but when you lose your autonomy and you have unethical nudging you into situations that you are not in control over and have not choose. So there are many breaches of human rights and our ability to say yes or no to opting in or out. So that's what this center is about. We're creating AI innovations that humans can trust.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anna. And I think that sort of conflict between, or trade-off potentially between explainability and accuracy is something we might well sort of come back to later if we have time. So let's move to Magnus.
Oh, thank you very much, Mark. Thank you also to the Chamber of Commerce for having me. I'm going to add a little bit to the very topical issues brought up by Julie and Anna. Start off by going back a little bit. I mean, an ethical issue with regard to AI is firstly one that we could call the spinning jenny problem. I mean, what are the consequences for human workers whose jobs are made unnecessary by automation? And as I said, this is the spinning jenny problem. It's not new. It's been with us through all historic automation and mechanization. It's a problem that's been along for a long time, and the main answer, of course, is upskilling and reskilling, but social welfare also needs to be part of the picture. But moving then into today's and tomorrow's AI, I would say that the main issue could be what I used to call the 2001 or HAL problem. What if intelligent machines start doing things that we didn't really expect them to do because we didn't program them properly? And a variant of this is that AIs can do things we didn't expect because they've been hacked. And these are called ethical alignment issues in AI discourse. And basically, what we're talking about are risk management issues. So you have to understand what risks are there actually, and how should we respond to the prevalence of risk? Should we ban the AI uses that are prone to create risks? Should we ignore them and just hope for the best? Or should we do a cost-benefit analysis and take measures to contain the risk? Well, in that last option, that's where law comes in. That's where we can do things with law. But I think also that businesses need to respond to protect their own interests. You have to have your own risk management with regard to the risk exposure that you have in your own business. So these are issues that I'm studying, focusing on financial AI usage, such as in high-frequency trading and so on. And then, of course, we can lastly look upon the future or the remote future. Think about something that I would call the Blade Runner problem. At what point will the ethical distinction between artificial intelligence and human intelligence begin to blur? Or actually, what is it really to be human? But we're not quite there yet, so we'll wait on that one. Thank you.
Thanks, Magnus. And then finally, Linus.
So I have a quite hands-on approach. So we're using, we want to democratize access to the knowledge hidden in patents, and that sounds like very specific. Why? 80% of the world's tech knowledge is hidden in patents only. So if you just go online on the internet or in a regular source and literature, you will only find a fraction. But this is expressed in a legal complex way, so which means that it's only accessible for experts and professionals, and regular people has to go to a professional to access it. So we're using AI to explain in a better way, so you can use your own language and extract information in a way that you understand it, even if you're just a researcher or a student or don't have a legal expression from this area. And from we see on this ethical part is one is integrity. So if we have one client that really trains on in their specific area of expertise, the system to be more smarter, to understand the query of novel text to extract good documents, of course, they don't want the competitor to benefit from that training. So how do you make that happen? How do you really control what is being trained, and how do you restrict the training to certain areas or certain providers, or should it be? I mean, will the providers take this into consideration? They would like to have more data is better, but is it actually good for the client? Another sort of ethical issue is, or maybe not ethical, but the language changes over time. So if you use a way of describing technical things 50 years ago, you don't do it in the same way today. So how do you keep track on the moving average of expressions, so you are able to include both old technologies and new technologies, even you're asking the same question? And specifically, when you have expressions on the area, it's going to be biased by how you think about technology today. And those prejudices will be locked into this black box. And how do you later on unlearn if it was wrong? So that is something I think is a very interesting topic, which has to be addressed. So we know how to steer it, because we are, even though it's an automatic gearing, we need to be able to be the driver at some time, just to show, you know, I want to have this specific gear. So those are my sort of generic boundaries. I think it's very important to discuss around. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. So I want to probe a little bit more on this question of kind of human decision-making versus machine decision-making, and it's coming up in some of the questions on the screen here. So, you know, I think we can sort of accept that machine decision making is imperfect. It makes mistakes. There are false positives. There are false negatives. It's getting better over time, but it still makes mistakes. But on the other hand, we also have human decision making, which is subject to all sorts of biases and prejudices that are often, not sort of visible. So, how do we sort of decide between humans and machines? Would you rather have an algorithm, to screen your job, or would you screen you for recruitment, or would you rather have an AI system that might, in some senses, be more impartial? So who would like to sort of maybe address that? Julie.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, I think there's some really interesting examples already where regulators are working with businesses in regulatory sandbox to do this exact sort of discovery and share the learnings. So to give you a few examples, in the UK for retail, the Home Office has set up a regulatory sandbox that will be looking at different forms of age checking at supermarkets. So believe it or not, the average human guesses within about 4 to 8 years of accuracy of whether you're old enough to buy that age-restricted good, whereas a machine can actually do it probably to about 1.5 years of accuracy for 13 to 24-year-olds and about 2.5 years of accuracy across the board. If you take that on another scale, if you look at the child sexual abuse images at the moment, we have law enforcement officers that would have to triage millions of images at huge psychological toll to ascertain the age of the victims and perpetrators of child abuse. And with this sort of technology, they're able to use that to basically triage a lot more quickly. And a third example would be the Information Commissioner's Office in the UK is looking at how to create age-appropriate access ahead of the age-appropriate design code and reduce grooming. So to enable sites with, say, 50 million plus users to triage, are these the right people that should be in the teens, 13 to 17 area? Are these the right people in the 18 plus? After that triage, obviously enabling other backup mechanisms. But I think those are all instances where you have high volumes, where actually at the moment there are harms to people that don't have an ID document that aren't included today. There's harms to enforcement officers reviewing material. And it's just physically not possible for firms in other ways to physically check 50 million users. Are they of the right age? And how can they at scale do that? So I think it's interesting with just that one lens to review that we can't always meet people in person for online services. And even when we can, how do you train one human to review documents, identity documents from over 200 countries around the world? And how do you enable them not to, show their own bias with that? So I think it's something that is quite nuanced and quite complicated, but actually there are already instances where if this is done with the right supervision, with approaches that do respect, that are transparent, do go across skin tone and gender, that can be supportive and can work alongside instances like these regulatory sandbox, which create and have oversight and ethical review to show to a regulator how this can work in different instances. Thank you.
Anna, I think you wanted to come in on that question.
Yes, so we need to first demystify this black box of AI, and we have to throw some kind of speed limit to how we implement AI in society. There's actually no market readiness threshold. So in no sector there are comparable levels of readiness and approval and validation for implementing AI broad. So you said, how do we mitigate these forms of discrimination and privacy intrusive, and how do we select what AI should do and not just apply what AI can do? Well, we're all meeting on an updated form of regulation that GDPR was falling short, and the EU says we will innovate AI with the competitive edge towards China and the US, creating AIs that are true to our values. So how do we do that? Well, EU said we're going to ban certain ethical surveillance, social scoring. We're going to ban AI applications that discriminate or capitalizes or manipulate you, and also the high risks AI application will go under a frameworks to test their way and ability to explain and detect and want to take accountability of it and have a robust governance structures around it. And then there's also the medium and limited risk AI applications that you will have to have transparency, so everyone knows this sector is on this part of the of EU's landscape of regulation is unregulated. These actors will not be regulated, but they have to say that you are talking to a bot, that you need transparency, and they encourage code of conduct. Yet we know that a chatbot can become not so pleasant and not also according to principles or ethical values of the organization. So with that said, we have now awakened to an era that every organization needs to put an ethical filter on their application to actually not breach upcoming EU law. And that's a very good stand of EU to compete with value-driven AI innovations and not capitalizing on dopamine and weaknesses, etc.
Brilliant. Thank you. So we have just under 4 minutes left. So I wanted to sort of pick up on a few of the questions that are coming through in the discussion. So one question is, which I think relates to Magnus's previous point, are we in danger of creating a superhuman, I guess a sort of a super intelligence, where we aren't needed any longer?
Well, thank you, Mark. Well, some authors say that we are in danger of doing just that. I mean, Nick Bostrom, Stuart Russell, and other prominent AI writers are warning us about that. I am not the person who could, second guess or have an opinion actually on what is really the empirical data that supports the threat of super intelligence that would, so to say, take over the world. I don't know about that. My major problem with that proposition is that it would somehow presuppose that AIs do have wishes and desires, and I can't see how they would actually have that. So that's my major, sort of objection to that scenario. I will just briefly comment on the existence of EU legislation or a proposal for an EU Artificial Intelligence Act. There is an issue with that act on my account, because it doesn't have a clear system of attribution of accountability. And that makes it sort of, well, like you wanted to protect your trade secrets with an NDA with no sanctions. Who is going to respect that? I think that why people respect the GDPR and make such a fuss about it, because it has very stringent sanctions. But this act doesn't have it. We'll see what comes out of it, but so far I'm not very impressed.
Okay, very good. Well, we've just got under 2 minutes left. So, and obviously this is a huge field, so there's so many sort of issues that we could discuss. But maybe if we could just ask the panel to conclude with the kind of one thing that we could do to ensure AI systems operate more ethically and fairly. And if you could just try and keep it to sort of 20-25 seconds, that would be great.
Yeah, I think it's very important to have accountability is one part, but testability. So in every other system you have, bench test, you run them against the system, and if you're going to test the car, you crash it and see what happens. You have to set up tests which you can run against system and see how it behaves under Monte Carlo situations. That's quite easy to do. But there's no sort of organization in place to put up these tests and do this kind of evaluation. So I think that is very important to get in place rather quickly.
Okay, great. Julie?
you. Yes, I think having some form of internal and external ethics boards that can help steer you on this journey is super helpful. We've got folk from the human rights side, last mile tech accessibility, online harms, consumer rights, and that is a real help to us weighing through the knotty issues, and they force us to blog about our approaches, look at the bias, look at the transparency. So I would encourage others, and actually looking at Anna's models, looks like some tremendous things in there.
Great. Magnus?
Yeah, I would say accountability is key. Ensure that there's a system of accountability, making it clear who is accountable for the actions of an AI agent, what sanctions can be imposed. I think that's the key.
Okay, and then Anna. I think you're on.
There are new competitive business models being transparent. We go from black box organization to glass box organization, where transparency is trust. So taking a stance and be transparent and explain how you use your client's data, it will become and have an ethical filter on your AI solution. It will become a competitive edge for you.
Brilliant. Well, fantastic discussion. I mean, thank you all so much. It feels like we're just scratching the surface of some very big topics, but I think some really interesting and provocative insights there. So if we can, let's have a virtual round of applause. And with that, I'll hand back to our Master of Ceremonies. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark, and the rest of the panel as well, for another very insightful discussion. Today, we have heard about how AI is giving organisations a competitive edge across multiple fields, sparking a new industrial revolution. We've examined the impact AI is likely to have on our daily lives and the types of technology that are really exciting investors. We've explored the ethical implications and trustworthiness of AI, because innovators have a responsibility to ensure this technology is used for the betterment of society. If you haven't engaged with AI already, I hope our Tech Forum has inspired you to do so. Though some of the potential applications can be quite scary, for most businesses and organizations, AI is simply a vehicle to draw value from their data, optimize processes, and overcome challenges. Thank you to all of our speakers who made this such a fascinating day. Today wouldn't have been possible without our sponsors and partners, including Pocket Law, and a special thank you to SEB, patrons of the Swedish Chamber of Commerce, for hosting us here virtually. And once again, a big thanks to our partners located all over the UK and Sweden. I would also like to thank the sponsors of the Swedish Chamber of Commerce Tech Week and supporting chambers. A special shout out to the Swedish Chamber of Commerce events team, who have done an incredible job putting this event together today. Thank you to all of you watching at home or in the office. We really appreciate all your questions and can't wait to bring you Tech Forum 2022, hopefully in person. Have a great evening.